is defined as careful and persistent work or effort. Each of you senators have been assigned duties, and there are responsibilities and expectations that come with these assignments. You must set out a strategic plan on how you will accomplish these tasks. In addition, you must not just be determined to do your task, but you must operate in a timely manner, giving exceptional service, and ensuring that your assignments are thoroughly completed. Dave Ramsey said, "Work is doing it. Discipline is doing it every day. Diligence is doing it well every day." Being a diligent person can make demands on leaders, but you must be determined that when you put your mark on a project or complete a task, no matter how tedious or difficult it may be, you will always be conscientious, industrious, and have left your mark of being an exceptional leader. Galatians 6:9 states, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." It's really more, I've always said, to be a better you, be diligent, and never let the charms of procrastination and excuses seduce you to fall for mediocrity. As diligent leaders and senators, be thorough in your assignments and in the laws that you will enact, understanding their far-reaching effects for the present and future. Cultivate good work habits so that you can keep on top of all the demands and tasks that you are assigned to do. Manage your time so that you can live a balanced life. Always do your best because you have many who are depending upon you and the service that you are giving. In conclusion, John Ron states, "Everyone must choose one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret." Let us pray. Dear God, thank you for the tasks and responsibilities assigned to each senator. Empower them to be diligent leaders who will serve with the spirit of excellence, a good work ethic, and the wise management of their time. Fill them with the wisdom that they need to serve in these challenging times, and surround them with core leaders who will support them in their assignments and undertakings. In the precious name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Please join in the prayer of our Lord. Our Father, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, Senators. Good morning, Senators. Are you sleeping on this Monday morning? Welcome to our Senate session of the 21st of March, 2022. Before we begin, we have a very special guest who I would like to recognize. She is the guest of Senator Maxine Seymour, Miss Waynisha Saunders. Waynisha, are you here? Just stand so we can acknowledge you. Waynisha is a 21-year-old founder of an organization entitled Gen Z Arise, which is dedicated to encouraging young Bahamians to engage in activism, community service, and mental health awareness. She is also the former Miss Teen Bahamas 2017. Let's please welcome Waynisha to the gallery. We would also like to take this time to recognize and congratulate Miss Sienna Evans, who represented the Bahamas extremely well at the Miss World pageant in Puerto Rico last week. She's not here with us, but we'd like to offer Ms. Evans our congratulations. Adoption of the minutes.
Mr. Vice President, I move that the minutes of the Senate session held on the 17th of February 2022 be adopted.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that the minutes of 17th of February 2022 be adopted as laid. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The minutes are adopted. Motions for leave of absence or leave to resign. Swearing in of new senators. Communications by the President. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the House of Assembly. Laying of documents by ministers.
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate copies of the following orders. The Industries Encouragement Approved Product, Alu Lux Bahamas Limited Order 2022, and the Currency Notes and Coins Amendment Order 2022.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate copies of the following rules. The Health Services COVID-19 Prevention and Management of Community Spread Amendment Number 6 Rules 2022. The Health Services COVID-19 Prevention and Management of Community Spread Amendment Number 7 Rules 2022. The Health Services COVID-19 Prevention and Management of Community Spread Amendment Number 8 Rules 2022. The Health Services COVID-19 Prevention and Management of Community Spread Amendment Number 9 2022. And the Health Services COVID-19 General Amendment Number 3 Rules 2022.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the following notice. The Road Traffic Amendment Number 2 Act 2020 Appointed Day Notice 2022.
Order that the document do be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the following reports. The fiscal year 2021-2022 quarter number 2 public debt statistical bulletin, the fiscal strategy report 2021, and the audit report on the Bahamas customs transportation fees for the period 2018 to 2021.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the documents do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, at this time, I will beg leave to lay on the table of the Senate a copy of the mid-year budget performance report for the 6 months ending 31st December 2021. This is the mid-year budget report, and at this time, as I lay it, Mr. Vice President, I would like to seek the concurrence of the side opposite that we can move directly into the debate on the mid-year budget report.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the mid-year budget report do lie on the table and be debated today in Senate. All those in favor say aye.
And thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I'd just like to thank the members of the side office for concurring that we can go directly into the state.
Before we move on, I will allow Senator the Honorable Darren Henfield to the floor to note his concurrence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. We on the side concur.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Halkitis.
Thank you once again, Mr. Vice President, and thanks once again to the side opposite for their concurrence. Mr. Vice President, it is my esteemed privilege to comment this short debate on the 2021-2022 mid-year budget statement and mid-year budget report in this chamber. Mr. Vice President, this is the first of such very important assessments of the government's fiscal performance under this administration. The exercise is important not only in that it holds government accountable for its decisions, but it enforces transparency in the dealings of government. And while this administration has only been at the helm for about half of the period under review, this assessment is important in that it provides a preliminary assessment of the transformative policies implemented under this administration to restore the Bahamian economy. You would note, Mr. Vice President, that in this session, we also laid the debt statistic, the second quarter debt statistical bulletin, which lays out the government debt as it stands. We also laid the fiscal strategy report, which details this administration's plans on managing the economy, managing the finances over the next 3 years. And we laid a report from the Auditor General. But all of this, Mr. Vice President, is in keeping with the commitment of the government to act in a timely manner to bring information forward to the public. Much of it is mandated by legislation, and we are in keeping with our obligations under that legislation to provide these reports in a timely manner. As I stated, this administration has been in government for beginning in September, middle September. And so this period under review, we are reviewing the period July 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. So we have been in power, so to speak, for about half of the period under review. Mr. Vice President, members would have heard the remarks by the Honorable Prime Minister in that other place of the state of the nation when this administration took the reins of government. Debt to GDP had risen rapidly, even exceeding levels of over 100%. Unemployment levels remain elevated under the pressure of COVID-19 and the related travel bans, lockdowns, and restrictive curfews. And government spending remained at high levels due to COVID-related spending, particularly in the health sector and in the social services sector. Fortunately for all of us, Mr. Vice President, on September 16, 2021, the Bahamian people voted for a change in government. To begin the process of change, immediately upon coming to office, this administration released a supplementary budget centered around several specific priorities to reallocate government resources to priority areas, to prioritize providing immediate relief to the Bahamian people, and to lay the foundation for a robust recovery of the Bahamian economy. And while we are still in early days, signs have already begun to point to positive progress on achieving these goals. While we do not expect that we will be able to right the ship of state and repair the public finances overnight, we are confident that, as we promised, the plans implemented in the last few weeks are laying a strong foundation to restore and expand the Bahamian economy. Mr. Vice President, I once again reflect on the statements made by the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the Honorable House of Assembly, where he provided an overview of the results of operations for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Total revenue collections for the first 6 months were estimated at $1.2 billion, and an increase of $453.8 million over the prior year during the peak of the COVID pandemic, and while the country was under restrictive and some might say oppressive lockdowns and curfew measures. And Mr. Vice President, naturally in doing a comparison of performance, we compare to last year, and we are always mindful that last year the economy was under lockdown. So these increases will appear large, and I just want to manage expectations that we will not see such large increases going forward. But it is a good thing that things are moving in a positive direction. In terms of specific components of revenue, we note the following. Tax receipts increased by $389.8 million to $959 million over the same period in the prior year. VAT receipts improved by $287.2 million to a total $573.5 million. And non-tax revenue improved by $63.7 million to $167.6 million. On the expenditure front, a minimal increase in total expenditure of $3.8 million, that's during the first 6 months, was observed during the first half of the year, with recurrent expenditure demonstrating an increase of $12.8 million. Key components of the increased recurrent expenditure: employee compensation increased by $14.6 million as a result of a reinstatement of promotions and raises owed to public servants which were suspended for the last 2 years due to Hurricane Dorian and the COVID-19 pandemic. Pension and gratuity payments increased by $5.5 million to provide for much overdue cost of living adjustments for retired civil servants. Public debt interest payments increased by $56.6 million. Naturally, with a high level of debt, the interest expense rose. And public corporation subsidies widened by $12.1 million to $217.8 million. And as you know, during the pandemic, there were suspensions on things such as water disconnections, etc. And so the subventions to the public corporations had to be increased. Capital spending, even though recurrent expenditure increased by 12.8, capital spending was reduced by $9.2 million as a result of a reduction in capital transfers of $6.3 million as transfers to businesses impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic fell away. Expenditure on non-financial assets experienced a net decline of $2.9 million. And within that decline was a $7.2 million reduction in spending on bridges and a 3.7 reduction in spending on the New Providence roadworks. And within that, we had a $4.9 million increase in spending on businesses, including on primary and secondary schools. Mr. Vice President, as we promised when we came to office, we are committed to reforming the country's fiscal health. This is one of our top priorities, and the Bahamian public can already begin to see the signs of recovery in only a few short months. During the first 6 months, when we look at the deficit, Mr. Vice President, the Bahamas experienced a net fiscal deficit of $285.7 million in the first half. This represents 61.1 or $448.6 million reduction. So in 2020, 2021, in that first 6 months, the deficit was $734 million. This year, it has been reduced to 285.7, just about 286 for the first 6 months. During the supplementary budget, when we presented the supplementary budget, Mr. Vice President, you would recall that we were forecasting a total year deficit of $858 million, which was down from the original 951 in the budget when it was presented in May of 2021. And as I said, at the half-year mark, our deficit is $287.7 million. And we are hopeful, Mr. Vice President, that we can maintain this lower level, and that when we come to the conclusion of this fiscal year, we come in even lower than $858 million. And we are hopeful about that. And signs, including signs of the strengthening economy, point that we might have good reason to be optimistic. But we remain cautiously optimistic, Mr. Speaker. But I believe that that is progress. And I believe that if we stay on the same track, we will be able to build on this strong foundation that is being laid. Mr. Vice President, I believe that our recently implemented policies have already begun to yield results. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has done untold damage to the global economy. Over 40 million persons have been infected, over 6 million people have died, over 200 million have become unemployed, and global value chains and markets came to a screeching halt. And as we see, as you begin to try and crank the world economy up again, you see some difficulties and bottlenecks that are causing problems all around the world in terms of price inflation. While in opposition, Mr. Vice President, we contended that the curfews and lockdowns did little to prevent COVID-19 spread and only stifled our economic rebound. The level of and the length of those lockdowns and curfews, Mr. Vice President. In November 2021, the government eliminated the then existing emergency orders, which imposed limitations on the movement of persons and curfews restricting the hours of business operations. Based on preliminary data from the Treasury, shortly after eliminating emergency orders, government tax receipts in December 2021 immediately rebounded to $202.1 million. And that is even higher than the pre-pandemic level of, if you look at December 2019, where the collection was $167.8 million. And again, just to point to the, we're talking about pre-pandemic, but as we all know, in 2019, we had Hurricane Dorian, I think it was in September of that year, that severely impacted as well. But what the early information shows, Mr. Vice President, is that as the economy was opened up and the restrictions were eased, we began to see more business activity and hence more collection to the government. Similarly, in January 2022, government revenue was at $232.1 million, which was in line with the $234 million posted in January of 2020, before the onset of the pandemic. So it points, Mr. Vice President, that we are recovering to levels that existed before the pandemic. Again, this is a good sign. There has been a lot of discussion, Mr. Vice President, about the level of debt. And in the early days of our administration, we spent a lot of time speaking with the rating agencies, with the IMF, and the other multilateral financial institutions like the IDB, the World Bank, investors in our securities, speaking to bankers, speaking to other stakeholders in the financial services industry, Mr. Vice President, because we wanted to give the reassurance that with a change in administration, we felt that all of those stakeholders needed to be assured that this new administration was committed to fiscal prudence, financial responsibility, honoring all of our obligations, and that there was no need for anyone to be concerned that somehow the new administration would not take those obligations seriously. And we've had some very, very fruitful conversations, Mr. Vice President, because in those conversations, I often mention that when the debt to GDP ratio hit 100% early in the year, that really got everyone's attention. And and then it has subsequently come down a bit into the mid 90s, but that really got people's attention. And I think it was prudent to be able to speak to all those stakeholders and assure them, new administration, but we have never not honored our financial obligations as a government across our history. And that is important. And so when we got up to 100%, people became even more concerned that they were than they were in the past. And so the level of the government's debt has become there's always been a subject of conversation, but even a more heightened interest in that level. And so, the important thing I think that we need to understand, Mr. Vice President, is governments will borrow and governments will have debt. People will borrow and people will have debt. But the important thing is for the government to be able to service that debt and not endanger the provision of other goods and services when that debt becomes too high. And so that is an ongoing program of conversation to ensure that stakeholders are confident in the direction that the government is going in terms of managing the public finances, and as well just to keep the members of the public informed. On the issue of the debt, Mr. Vice President, as you know, under the Public Debt Management Act, a debt management unit has been established in the Ministry of Finance, and we're providing resources to that unit, additional resources so that they can perform their function. And this administration appointed a private sector debt advisory committee made up of individuals in the private sector, chaired by a former Minister of State for Finance and a former governor of Central Bank in the person of the Honorable James Smith, to give another set of eyes, so to speak, a private sector perspective, and that is the level of importance that we attach to managing the debt and making sure that it is at a level that is sustainable, that we can pay it, we can manage it, and we're not paying so much in debt service that it endangers provision of other goods and services. That committee has met and their work has begun, and we expect to begin to get some feedback from them as time goes on, Mr. Vice President. It was, and in going forward, we did not lay it here today, but there is published as well a medium-term debt management strategy. And it is available online. I think it's at budget.gov.bs. And if it's not, it will be very shortly, but it should be. By the time I finish speaking, it should be online. But again, what it does is, and we laid today the statistical report, which has the information on all the outstanding government debt, who we owe it to, how much interest, etc. And the medium-term debt management strategy, what it sets out is, over the next 3 years, this is how we intend to manage the debt that we have. And should we need to incur new debt, these are the principles that we will follow. We're looking, of course, to minimize the cost as best as we can. Over the last few years, we've had an increase in the US dollar component. And so we want to gradually begin to move back to more heavyweight in the Bahamian dollar component. We want to look at, for example, more fixed interest, fixed rate, as opposed to the floating rate where possible. And the idea is that in conjunction with the debt management unit and Ministry of Finance, private sector advisory committee he can come up with the best solutions. One, and it might involve using different types of instruments, and maybe even diversifying in different currencies other than U.S. dollars. But the idea is to get two heads are better than one, and so the idea is to get all of that wealth of knowledge and experience that resides in the private sector to give them an avenue whereby they can channel that into the government and into our decision-making process, Mr. Vice President. There has been some commentary about the recently announced repo transaction, Mr. Vice President, but I can say that we were able to access the funds at a 2.4% per annum for a 2-year period. And we think that is a significant saving, and we are not concerned at all that we had to collateralize it with some securities that were in the central bank. For example, if we compare it to the recent bond offering that was done in 2021 at 8.95%, even though it was 10 years and this is 2 years, the idea, Mr. Vice President, is that you actively manage your portfolio. So if you can raise funds at a cheaper level, it might be shorter term. As you move on, it's an active management process. And the public, Mr. Vice President, I should say, should expect to see more of this information coming forward. As we do these things, we let the public know this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. So, as well, there was some commentary about some issues that government stock issues that the central bank put out, and they were not fully subscribed. And we are confident, Mr. Vice President, that has less to do with lack of confidence, but more to do with issues like timing. And as you know, some of the biggest employers and biggest pension funds have been severely impacted by COVID-19. When you talk about hotels being shut down for months upon months, and and other businesses having reduced activity, the amount of funds available for investment it's not back to the level that it was. But suffice it to say that we've been in some discussions, and we have agreed that a lot of it has to do with timing and what they call market intelligence, getting an idea of what is the best time to come and what is the best product to bring to satisfy investors, but not so much, Mr. Vice President, anything to do with lack of confidence. So we are satisfied. We are happy with the direction that we're going in terms of the debt management unit and the debt advisory committee. We look forward to that sort of collaboration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President. And so just for example, if I were to go just to close off on the repo transaction, Mr. Vice President, we borrowed about $206 million at 2.4%, and which represents significant savings on if we had gone out to the bond market in this type of environment where there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty centered around geopolitical events that are beyond our control. Oh, we saved about cash secured. So yeah. So for example, no, I'll tell you, Mr. Attorney, if the bond issue, it was $600 million, and then there was another $225 million, that 8.95%. This repo was done at 2.4. So if we recognized, if we compared getting $200 million at 8.95% versus $200 million at 2%, you save $26.2 million over the 2 years. And the point is made. The point is taken that yes, it is basically a cash secured loan, and the term is different. It's 2 years versus 10. But my point is, and our point is, Mr. Vice President, if you need money, you look out and you find the absolute best terms that you can find. And if it's shorter, you take advantage of it. And during this time period, then you are actively working so that when the loan becomes due, you're in a position to do something else. So it's a matter of just taking the best option. Now, like I said, I just want to say, because there was some commentary that, the government never put up collateral before, they don't trust you all, that's why you got to put up collateral. That's not the case. It's just a matter of using this particular instrument. So, I say that to say, because then there was some related commentary about difficulty in raising funds. And I just want to say again, absolutely no difficulty, Mr. Vice President. The economy is rebounding. We're communicating more with our stakeholders. We're providing the reports in a timely manner. And we believe that that undergirds a lot of confidence in our administration and in our economy. Mr. Vice President, we can manage the debt and we can count the money, but our future success depends on
Senator Alcides has the floor.
That's all right. Our future success depends on growth in government revenue, Mr. Vice President. I won't hazard it because I only remember the last part of the quote. Something make merry and something do it, but money solves all things. So that's the only part I remember. So one of the key components of our plan to restore the nation's fiscal health, as articulated in the mid-year budget statement and in the fiscal 2021 fiscal strategy document, is the plan to move government revenue to a level of 25% of GDP. And with the aspiration of achieving a balanced budget around 2024, 2025. As previously stated by the Prime Minister, to achieve this goal, increases in taxes would certainly be a last resort measure. Instead, I want to focus on a few of the other components of the plan, which center around making improvements and reforms in the administration of tax collection. I'll go through a few of them, Mr. Vice President. Reestablishment of the Revenue Policy Committee. This Revenue Policy Committee, comprised of the heads of the major revenue collection agencies across government, is tasked with identifying areas of revenue leakage. And by allowing for dialogue amongst these agencies, any loopholes and operational deficiencies, some of them are already being identified. So agencies working together, getting together periodically, talking, sharing information so that they can all, improve in terms of any revenue leakage. We are reestablishing a fully resourced revenue enhancement unit, Mr. Vice President. When last in office, one of the chief reforms in revenue collections was the creation of the Revenue Enhancement Unit in the Department of Inland Revenue. Today, that unit has been reconstituted, and we're giving resources to them as we go on gradually. And our aim is to develop a world-class tax compliance organization and implement a culture of adopting best practices at inland revenue, customs, and other government entities. So making sure they have the resources, the space, and so forth that they need. We want to establish a large taxpayer unit in the Department of Inland Revenue, Mr. Vice President, in line with international best practice to improve service delivery to taxpayers who contribute the majority of tax revenues. A dedicated unit is being created to enhance the quality of service and deliver rapid results to those clients who collect and pay the largest amount of money into the government coffers. And so by ensuring swift receipt of cash from this grouping, government cash flows are protected. And that is not to say small taxpayers is being neglected, but we just want to make sure that in line with the ease of doing business initiatives, we can move large taxpayers through the system quickly. Mr. Vice President, as you know, there's been an update of the real property tax rolls and assessments. And over 7 years ago, the government began a process of property identification and mapping in an effort to update property records, tax records, and provide for better land use planning. Since then, a massive effort has been completed in New Providence to update the property tax rolls, providing more accurate details of developed parcels of land in New Providence. And we want to accelerate the completion of this exercise with updated reassessment information and updating the registry for previously unregistered properties. You would recall, Mr. Vice President, that before the implementation of VAT, during the debate, the long public debate, and it came out that, the government had anywhere from $400 to $600 million in outstanding property tax. And I would go to the seminars and the workshops and the town hall meetings, and there'd ever be someone who say, listen, man, go collect that real property tax. And you wouldn't have to do any VAT. It's a long-standing issue, Mr. Vice President. And some assessments have gone out. There's been some reaction. And what we've been trying to do is hear those objections and complaints as soon as possible so that people can be satisfied. Where mistakes are made, they'll be corrected quickly, and any explanations that need to be done. And I've asked the DIR to treat with those very quickly, because you have a lot of people who want to pay quickly, but they want to make sure that their records are accurate, and so we're endeavoring to do that. And so I move to this next point, Mr. Vice President. For years, we have lamented the large and increasing balance of real property tax arrears being generated in our system due to weak mechanisms to enforce payment. We have begun conversations and consultations with financial institutions to begin to close this gap through a combination of negotiated agreements with financial institutions. The idea is that people can begin to pay through the bank, a monthly payment perhaps. And so that is a conversation that we're having with the commercial banks so that we can work together to close that gap, because inevitably what happens if individuals don't pay, the arrears begin to accumulate, and they get to a situation where the property is about to be sold, and there's these huge outstandings, and it causes a lot of problems. Mr. Vice President, we will continue to monitor and expand the customs electronic single window, the click to clear. Thus far, the electronic single window has allowed for improvements in service delivery, improved collection, and accounting for revenue. And so while this platform is admirable, without supporting mechanisms, this might become susceptible to fraud. And so to improve revenue collections, we intend to strengthen risk-based inspection of air freight containers and use analytics-based post-clearance audits to improve service to clients. And as well, finally, Mr. Vice President, as you know, with the increased use of digital technology to engage in business, the ability to accurately and effectively collect government taxes is becoming difficult. And so we want to use data collection agreements so that we can tighten the net and reduce the incidence of avoidance via online transactions. Mr. Vice President, some might say that the goal of revenue to GDP target of 25% is ambitious, but we have, and I've just enumerated a few of them, we have carefully constructed plans to achieve this goal, many of which are already underway. And that 25% target for the Bahamas is not unreasonable in and of itself. When you look at other countries, for example, we are not an advanced nation, but in the G7 nations, the ratio averages about 36%, in the Euro area, about 46%, and even in the Latin American and Caribbean, an average revenue to GDP ratio of 27%. That's the experience, with some regionals as high as 30% in countries like Jamaica, Barbados, and Belize. So it can happen. the combination of ensuring that the economy grows and ensuring that you have your systems in place to ensure collection of what is due, and so that everybody pays their fair share, then it's not a burden on one particular class of people, or class of taxpayers, Mr. Vice President. In terms of just a few future policy initiatives, Mr. Vice President, as we know, the inflation is the hot topic, so to speak, and it's on the rise globally. In the U.S., 40-year highs in terms of inflation, over 7%, approaching 8%, and the unrest in the Ukraine is expected to exacerbate the problem. In the short term, the little can be done. We have been in some discussions with some wholesalers to see how, if there's anything in terms of government processes that we can do to smooth, any bottlenecks, so that their business might be improved. Our view is to empower our Consumer and Prices Commission to ensure that we avoid any sort of gouging that uses an excuse of unrest to unfairly hike up prices. But we are a small economy in a increasingly integrated global economy, and the world is still a very dangerous place, Mr. Vice President. And so, when you think it's peace and safety and COVID is behind you and you're looking in the right direction and things are starting to pick up, there's an outbreak of war, and then the response to it is, a global sanctions program that again, all of it taken together causes disruptions and uncertainty, which is just as bad. That uncertainty. Mr. Vice President, for many years we've been working on a national trade policy, and that is almost complete. That is going out for more consultation. And what we want to do is, every time we talk about trade, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the argument seems to get hijacked by WTO and free trade and free movement, and then for years, I think we're in the 22nd year of trying to join. For one example, the WTO. But trade is much more than that. Trade is much more than the WTO. We have our Caribbean partners. We have partners in Latin America, partners in Europe, and then with the Brexit, you have your partnership, you have your agreement with the Europeans, and you have to get an agreement in place with the UK. Our view, Mr. Vice President, is trade is important, and so we have to have a coordinated approach to it. And my view, is that our job is to ensure that our local actors, our business people, become aware of opportunities that might exist for them. And so it's not seen as an agenda to push some sort of free movement or that sort of thing, which becomes the subject of the debate and everything else gets drowned out. But how do we convince people that to be able to easily trade with your partners and neighbors and partners around the world, it's a good thing with appropriate protections in place for a small economy. And so we expect to, we think it will allow for diversification of the Bahamian economy. It will allow for us to use the digital economy, e-commerce, etc., for Bahamians to take advantage. And so that is a discussion that we will be having as we move ahead in the coming weeks and months. During the pandemic, Mr. Vice President, our financial services industry has endured to a large extent, even though within the industry, shifts within various segments of it, fintech and crypto and digital assets have become more important. And so we are actively pursuing investment in those areas and making sure that we have the regulation and the policy positions in place to be able to manage that and ensure that we are, unfortunately, in this environment we live in, regulation is always one of the first things that you have to think about. But in conjunction with the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies, the Financial Services Board, the Bahamas Association of Compliant Officers, the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services, talking with all of those, because the BFSB is going to do, and AIBT will promote. The Bahamas Institute of Financial Services does a tremendous job in terms of training people for the financial services industry, and compliance, has become a big part of financial services. And so we're in active discussions with all of those to make sure, again, that we have that channel through which those people in the private sector and practitioners can bring their knowledge and experience to bear in the government. And the BFSB, beginning tomorrow, will be in New York for an event promoting the Bahamas, going back out, showing the world that we're open for business. They're welcome to come to the Bahamas to do financial services business. So in conclusion, Mr. Vice President, on the campaign trail, this administration made several promises to the Bahamian people. Promises that at the time we fully intended to keep and have already begun to live up to. We have reduced the rate of VAT across the board from 12% to 10%. We have removed the curfew measures, which were stifling the rebound of our Bahamian economy. We have increased support to our hardworking pensioners and public servants. And in short, Mr. Vice President, I believe we have begun to alleviate the suffering of our Bahamian people. All signs point to a strengthening economy, Mr. Vice President. We are hopeful that COVID-19 continues to be in the rearview mirror, and we are cautiously optimistic, and we have good reason for that optimism. But as we go forward, our economy will move from strength to strength, and the Bahamian people will be the beneficiaries of it. And it is our job of this administration to ensure that through our prudent fiscal management, that the Bahamian people can have trust and confidence that they are in secure and safe hands. We are bullish on the Bahamas, Mr. Vice President. We believe that we will rebound well, and you're bullish on the Bahamas, and we are confident, and we will continue to work with our stakeholders and our industry partners to make sure that as we move forward, as we move ahead, we're moving together with all people who want to contribute to this positive upward momentum. They feel that they have a stake and their views are taken into account, Mr. Vice President. So with those few words, Mr. Vice President, I would just like to lay this mid-year budget performance report on the table of the Senate. Thank you.
As many the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable James Roll Turner.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Vice President. Every day above ground is a wonderful day, and I continue to be pleased and often surprised as I move around this Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I listen to the opinions that people express, and I see the behavior of our people. I see even this morning, Senator Maxine was kind enough to bring one of her folk in who talks about agitating for certain things, and that's wonderful. because something and someone always has to be the conscience of a people and the conscience of a country. So when we see youngsters and we see young folk like Senator Mack saying, getting involved with these things, it's always appreciated. Now, I got to tell you that this midterm budget has been a hot button topic for a lot of people. I went to church last Sunday. I was talking about it. We went into a restaurant. I was greeted with some thoughts about it, and people are looking at it from all sorts of angles. And I got to tell you that I see the full 360 degree of emotions associated with just this short assessment. You know, some folks are happy, some folks are sad, some folks are angry, you know, but at the end of the day, I tell folks that you ought not get stuck where you're at. Look ahead, because there's some brighter things ahead for you. Mr. Vice President, there are many times on the roadway of life when we're tempted to pause, and we should pause, sometimes. Maybe even get distracted for a while and launch into a direction of disgust. And these things are often easy to embrace, but maturity, if we have it, usually allows us to remain focused and advance with the task at hand. There's a lot of disappointment, I recognize, and repugnance and a sheer surprise of the yesteryear behavior that we have been seeing and being exposed more and more as it relates to financial and fiscal responsibility of yesteryear. But I suspect there will come a time when we will be really able to have a mature conversation about some of that, because there are some things that we ought to discuss as a country and as neighbors and as friends. I am from Grand Bahamas, so I can tell you that I have seen a lot of that ugliness, quite frankly, up close and very personal. So I certainly look forward to having the conversation about some of that yesteryear behavior. However, for many parts of this country, this mid-year budget review is really a bridge over troubled waters. And I'm going to describe it as a bridge over troubled waters because I got to tell you, when I travel over to Paradise Island, I don't focus on the bridge. I accept the fact that there are supposed to be some technicians who are responsible for making sure that the bridge is fit for the journey. So I don't get stuck on the bridge. When I travel from Grand Bahama to Nassau, sometimes I look below, I see the water raging and I see all kinds of things. And I say to myself, boy, even a good swimmer would have some trouble if this thing go down. But I take comfort in knowing that there are competent professionals that are in the cockpit. So I keep my eyes focused on where I'm supposed to be going, and I focus on the destination ahead, recognizing that I should be there in about 35 minutes. Now, when I am not there and I do not see the land in 35 minutes, I start to get concerned. When we look at the budget presentation statement, we should accept that credible professionals have reviewed this, and they are submitting for our review a specific period that we ought to be speaking about. They're giving us some advice on a short period of our financial affairs. Now, I'm going to touch base on a few areas, but I am not concerned with the journey because my intention is to be focused on the destination and managing the expectation of the arrival. Now, the journey, the financial advice. Mr. Vice President, there is turmoil in the world that affects us, but the difference between success and misery is really the management of the opportunities before you. Improvements in the global economy are aiding the rebounding of many nations, and the Bahamas, thankfully, is no exception. How we navigate through these necessary adjustments make all the difference. Certainly, the wisdom in removing several elements of the emergency orders was a leap in the right direction, and we are certainly reaping the rewards of a wise decision today. Given where we came from the last few years with the hurricanes and the pandemics, as far as revenue performance is concerned, I did not expect to see any gangbuster gains over the last 6 months, so there were no surprises. But it is noteworthy to recognize that we are trending in the right direction, and this is not something that we could have declared even 10 months ago. So I know that something good has occurred, a change has occurred, and we are heading in the right direction. When I reflect on the performance of the total expenditures and the moderate increase, I shall declare that when a government makes a commitment for the people and it causes, shall I say, a minor irritation, we should learn to tolerate it just as we would tolerate the odor associated with the waste excreted from a newborn baby. We must learn never to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We must exercise that maturity. Where we saw an increase in these expenditures, we witnessed the reinstatement of promotions, the granting of raises that were due public servants, the adjustments to pensions and gratuities, and cost of living amounts to persons who have served their country well and are now in the retirement stages. They deserve these adjustments. The government presented these adjustments. So this minor irritation we ought to be able to bear. To criticize any of these areas is nothing short of disingenuous and would be exhibiting a blatant dislike for the Bahamian people. And how dare anyone in these honorable chambers allow such a charge to be placed at their feet? I read through the statement, and it's noteworthy that the central government debt increased by about $396 million and was at 94.6% of the GDP at the end of 2021, which represents a decline from the last reported percentage of 100.2% of the GDP at June 2021. So again, things appear to be heading gently in the right direction. There are some areas of this mid-year presentation that I must admit I will await to comment on, because I want to be able to do it without conjecture and speculation. We have heard that a review of the food programs, the Parks and Beaches Authorities, the Water and Sewage Corporation, Bahamas Power and Light, and the Disaster Recovery Authority are underway. I'm from Grand Bahama, and like I said, I've seen some of this ugly stuff, quite frankly, up close. So I look forward to seeing an unbiased factual report as to what has happened in many of those areas. You see, when your home lies in ruins 2.5 years later, you're working limited days, and in some cases, some people don't even have jobs. When you're still hoping to get food vouchers, and you hear that someone has a little over $2 million sitting somewhere, unused for its original intent to help others, it surges a creation of a painful hole of disappointment in you, because you know that in this day and age, no one should be sitting with funds in their account that should have been applied to helping people. So I look forward to the report that gives us the facts on all of that. Let me tell you, as a decent Bahamian citizen, if we find out that you are mistreating our people, you know what's been going on in our community? There's an outrage at mistreatment of women and children. But if we find out you are mistreating our people, our women, and our children, we reserve the right to deal with such perpetrators in an appropriate manner. No abuse, none of it is acceptable. We have to be known as a society that upholds decent principles of accountability and ultimately transparency in what we have done and what we are doing on behalf of others, what we propose to be doing on behalf of the Bahamian people. It is quite evident that this midterm budget at the end of 2021, this report has some well-defined short to medium-term objectives. It clearly articulates a plan and a desire to ensure that we systematically move forward toward a much better financial position in our country. And we all know that making sure that we have our financial house in order is very important to a country. What we have witnessed with the free COVID testing and a renewed focus to extract what opportunities exist in the orange, blue, and green economies will no doubt bode well for diversification. Traditional financing today can be tough, but I believe with the opportunities that exist outside of the traditional avenues, we will see success in non-traditional partnerships, and creative minds will have a well-deserved opportunity for success that does not readily exist in the traditional mechanisms only. I see signs that we are truly moving with the times, and that's refreshing because this is a day and an age where the truth is you are either going to be a pioneer or you're going to become a dinosaur. So we have to make the wise decisions to become pioneers. Otherwise, we will become victims of other people's folly. There are several acts that we are advised that will be advanced as a part of the future policy initiatives, and that's noble. Nothing less should be expected. We know that the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Public Procurement Act, and especially the Public Financial Management Acts are all relevant and can be and can represent good guidelines as we move forward. As relates to capital expenditure, I see that the spending priorities in the short term, a great deal of this will focus on hurricane rebuilding efforts, targeted investments in health infrastructure, roads and airports, using public and private partnerships. Well, I say thank God because it seems help is on the way. I really wish I could stop speaking about the devastation of hurricanes, Mr. Vice President. But can you imagine Nassau without a proper airport? Can you imagine the Princess Margaret Hospital functioning at 15% of its service capacity? God forbid that, eh? But this would be akin to the plight of Grand Bahama following Hurricane Dorian up to almost now. Now, Mr. Vice President, earlier I mentioned that this midterm budget is akin to a bridge to paradise and a flight to a destination of interest. I'm aware that what lies ahead suggests that our largest and most promising resort on Grand Bahama Island, that lays currently dormant, shall rise from the ashes of past failures and provide once again an opportunity for Grand Bahamians to have legitimate reasons to return home, and not only return home, but to contribute to their economy. So I am enthusiastic about the future. This bridge over our troubled waters is a wonderful thing. I'm aware that we are approaching a significant probability that that hotel will soon change hands. We all look forward to something new happening in Grand Bahama. The midterm budget reflects the compassion of a government that extended the orders that allow for duty-free concessions for the restoration of houses, various homes and buildings that were damaged and devastated during the hurricanes in Abaco and Grand Bahama. So again, this is a good bridge to where we want to go. The curfews are now gone, and the people are moving about trying to regain the territories that they lost. So that is good. So that breeds optimism to us. There's a request for performance that's coming for the construction of an appropriate airport for Grand Bahama. So there's more enthusiasm for that northern Bahama Island. A new hospital for Grand Bahama. There were days when I really never thought about a hospital. Kind of almost irrelevant to me. But now, amen. Now we're breaking ground and we're looking forward to a proper medical facility. I joked with a friend and I tell him, I say, a good hospital is like a good insurance policy. You hope you never need it. But if you ever do, you want to make sure it's there. A new hospital, yes. We're about to empower Grand Bahama, a program that is designated to specifically help the ailing economy of Grand Bahama. So we know that things are changing. The University of the Bahamas Northern Campus is moving to downtown Freeport, a facility that was destroyed in the hurricane, just now being restored, just now returning. This will breathe life to downtown Freeport. The East Grand Bahama Administrative Complex is likely to be open in June 2022. And can you imagine? This is going into nearly 3 years into the hurricane. The multi-purpose sporting complex in Grand Bahama is also about to take on a new life. Because you see, there's got to be balance. Yeah, we got to take care of our older folks. We got to make sure that the middle class is cared for. But we ought to ensure that there is something for our youth. The multi-purpose sporting complex in Grand Bahama not only functions as a shelter, but it's also going to be presenting an indoor swimming facility. So we see there's even growth there. So when I look at this midterm budget review as a bridge over troubled waters, I'm giving you the reasons why. We're optimistic now in Grand Bahama about our future. Carnival Cruise Line is once again talking about this whole port project. You see, Mr. Vice President, I am focused. Grand Bahamians are focused on what's ahead. And that is why the midterm statement is a bridge over troubled waters for us. And now we can see clearly that brighter days are ahead. This midterm budget review reminds us that neglect and abuse for many parts of the Bahamas is now over. People have a right to be optimistic and raise their expectations moving forward. This midterm advice brings intellectual dignity to a process and integrity back to a process that ought to be laden with optimism and opportunity for all. As such, it is a good piece of advice. I accept it as exactly that, and I support that which has been presented. Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to speak in this honorable home. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Ellis.
Mr. Vice President. The 21st of March is internationally known as World Down Syndrome Day. The 21st day of the third month was chosen to signify the uniqueness of the triplication of the 21st chromosome, which causes Down syndrome. Down syndrome is universally present across racial, gender, and socioeconomic lines. Down syndrome causes various degrees of intellectual and physical disability and associated medical issues. On this day, people all around the world celebrate this day by wearing brightly colored mismatched socks. Down syndrome chromosomes look like mismatched socks. Today, I apologize for breaking the dress code of this upper chamber, but I'm rocking my brightly colored mismatched socks today to celebrate World Down Syndrome Day. I'll show you after. I would like to say hats off to the Bahamas Down Syndrome Association and to the team at Ty's Place for providing greater awareness in the community and providing a workplace for special needs adults to work with dignity. Ty's Place is my daughter's favorite lunch provider. Their chicken fingers have satisfied my late lunch appetite on many occasions. Today, we are here to make our contribution to the mid-year budget debate. This is our first glimpse of the PLP's fiscal strategy and upcoming plans. It's time to get down to business. Every new government goes through the transition of eager new leaders to change the world, to the realization that decisions involved in leading are a lot harder than they look from the outside. The government has tabled its fiscal strategy report, the mid-year budget performance, the debt statistical bulletin. The strategy report gives us an indication of what is ahead over the next 4 years. Across the board, the government has forecasted that its reoccurring expenses, wages, salaries, supplies, will be reduced next year. The Ministry of Education's expenses will be reduced next year. I get to that. This means less resources, less training, doubtful salary increases, and less hires. The Ministry of Education is tasked with educating our children, the future of the nation, and providing education to help our citizens and residents remain competitive in the labor force. Thankfully, most of our students have returned to online instruction. It is undeniable that some of them have been adversely impacted by the prolonged virtual instruction. Teachers have been working diligently to help students reverse learning loss. Extra resources ought to be allocated to provide additional training and resources to help teachers help students. Now is not the time to make less books, less instruments, and less staff available to our students. What does this reduced budget mean for teachers, students, parents, and the future of the economy? The Ministry of National Security, the police force, and the defense force have all been forecasted to reduce their expenditure. While crime is not a political issue, The failure to provide adequate resources to those persons tasked with securing our protection is scary. The police force has announced that it is establishing a unit to focus on domestic violence. This unit is long overdue, but will require officers to be trained on how to deal with domestic violence complaints. You cannot treat a domestic violence matter the same way you would treat a murder or an armed robbery. But what does this reduced budget mean? Domestic violence training instead of defense tactics training, mass casualty training, leadership training? Does this mean that the police force and the defense force will not be able to hire as many new recruits as usual? We are fighting crime with reduced resources when the criminals, those that ignore our laws, seem to have unlimited resources. And then there's the projected $63 million reduction in wages and salaries. Again, what does this mean? Does this mean terminations in the public service? No salary increases in the public service? Less hires in the public service? The Ministry of Health and Wellness is also forecasted to have reduced expenditures. Although the government appears to believe that COVID-19 does not exist in a hotel, we are still in a pandemic, with reports of new strains released almost monthly. We are going to continue to provide health care during a pandemic with a budget that has been reduced to pre-pandemic levels. The government has failed to provide us with an explanation or an understanding as to the implications of this reduced budget. We are forecasted to have a series of lean years, even though government revenue is projected to continuously increase. But interestingly, government expenditure is going to go right back up before the next election year. Not sure whether we should applaud or be concerned about that level of transparency. This PLP government has already taken several steps to adversely impact our quality of life. 2 years ago, the government engaged in a review of state-owned enterprises to identify possible cost-saving initiatives. The plan targeted $100 million in savings over the medium term. This New Day government has deferred those initiatives until later this year. State-owned enterprises are a considerable expense to Bahamians. They represent an additional governmental expenditure. Any opportunity to run these enterprises more efficiently and creating cost savings is a blessing. At the end of last month, Bahamas Power and Light announced that customers would experience a rise in fuel costs. The government intervened and the position was recalled. The intervention of the executive in the operation of state-run utilities like BPL have resulted in increased costs and inconvenience. We have blackouts because equipment is not maintained, which isn't surprising because these enterprises operate at a loss. This would surely impact the ability to maintain equipment. Successive generations have paid the cost of this mismanagement. The PLP government has decided that they don't need cost-saving measures right now. The F&M government engaged in a fuel hedging exercise to combat the challenge of high fuel prices. This has resulted in the lowest prices for consumers in decades. The hedging was scheduled to expire at the end of this month, and the government chose not to renew it. So the steps we took to keep costs down are expiring. Not surprisingly, BPL has announced that those costs for electricity will increase. That's the funny thing about cause and effect. This was another missed opportunity to help consumers. The increased cost of living is undeniable. Maybe some aren't feeling it because they aren't the ones going to the food store and they're driving red plates so they don't have to pay for gas. But we are feeling it. Going to the food store has become frustrating and a depressing experience. Food prices have increased. Bread basket items, medicine, diapers, feminine products have increased twice. They added VAT on top of the inflation price. These items are necessary to life. Tylenol should never be too expensive. Diapers should never be budgeted. Feminine products are not luxury items. While once again, I encourage persons to purchase their fruits and vegetables from BAMSI, BAMSI does not yet have the capacity to provide fruits and vegetables for the nation. I'm going to get to gas prices next. But that's an additional trip in the car. And I don't know about you, but after I went to the gas station this week, I have decided to limit my outgoings and work on getting picked up more. Unfortunately, eating healthier has become more expensive. And now it's a lot easier to put chips in a lunchbox than a fruit or vegetable. Now, last week, I wasn't very diligent as I normally am. And I went to the gas station when the light was almost about to turn on in my car. Normally, I go about a quarter of a tank. I put $50 in my car, and that didn't fill it up. The following week, last week, I did a little better. I got to the gas station, not on a hope and a prayer, but I decided to put $55 in my car because I knew that gas prices had gone up. Still didn't hit the full tank mark. Mr. Vice President, I'm not putting $60 in my car a week. So I'm just going to have to adjust my movements and look into this carpooling thing. I know the increased prices, inflation, are as a result of external factors, but the impact hits very close to home. It's in our pockets, our wallets, our fridges, our cupboards, and our gas tanks. We've seen that our neighbors in Turks and Caicos and Barbados have received help from the government to mitigate the effects of rising prices. In Turks and Caicos, they have reduced taxes and processing fees on fuel for a period of 6 months. In Barbados, VAT payable on fuel has been reduced for at least 6 months. And then adding insult to injury, Barbados has decided to remove VAT from feminine products, diapers, antiperspirants, vitamins, and multi-minerals. It is the age-old problem of expenses increasing and our salaries are not. If we are lucky enough to have one. This then brings me to the discontinuation of the government's unemployment benefit by this administration. Mr. Vice President, I'm proud to say that I was a member of the National Insurance Board under the last administration. The F&M government made bold steps in social assistance with the unemployment benefit. After the destruction and devastation of Hurricane Dorian, the government created an unemployment benefit for those persons in Abaco and Grand Bahama that were adversely impacted. The National Insurance Board office on Blue Hill Road was set up as a hub for persons who needed to apply for the benefit and register with the Department of Labor. The government wanted to provide relief to those who had already suffered significant loss. That's what governments are supposed to do, not make things more difficult. Then came the pandemic. The government expanded its unemployment benefit to persons who would not normally be covered by the NIB's unemployment. Thousands of Bahamians benefited from these programs. They have not been perfect, but they have provided real solutions and made the lives of Bahamians better. The F&M government provided real assistance. This government has eliminated its allocation for the food assistance program in this budget. This is perhaps the deepest and coldest cut of all. Food insecurity prior to the pandemic was a real problem in our country. Surely the government cannot be of the view that the food assistance program is no longer needed. The Hands for Hunger website tells us that 1 in every 3 people in the Bahamas face some level of food insecurity. Part of our population has less than $4 a day to spend on food. Organizations like Hands for Hunger, the Feeding Network, and Great Commission Ministries have been dedicated to providing food to our communities for many years. Our unemployment numbers have not returned to pre-pandemic levels. Our food costs are skyrocketing. The need for food assistance has not been eliminated. The government has made many allegations about the efficiency of the food assistance program in an attempt to soil the legacy of the previous administration. While they are playing politics, people continue to struggle. You have $4 a day to spend on food, and the prices are rising. Instead of focusing on spewing unsubstantiated allegations, start focusing on the problems and providing relief. If it is their belief that they can run the food assistance program better, run it. Don't cancel it. The goal at the end of the day is to provide food assistance. The F&M government knew this, and they launched a program to help our brothers and sisters feed their families. The F&M government improved the quality of life by introducing practical initiatives to help. They launched the VAT-free holiday on school supplies in August to help reduce expenses associated with the new school year. They launched the Click to Clear portal. In fact, the Financial Strategy Report describes it as launched in September 2019 to ensure the efficient collection and maximization of customs revenue. But maybe these were the exact words copied from the F&M's fiscal strategy policy that the member from East Grand Bahama referred to in his contribution. We launched the initiative to digitize government services. We are able to request police certificates, renew our driver's license, make appointments to license and register our cars, marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates, and even renew our passports. Now, I've got to say, if we could only renew our children's passports online, glory. As previously mentioned, we had the fuel hedging exercise, which resulted in lower electricity bills. We launched the Labor on the Blocks program, which delivered job opportunities. We launched the centralized online portal to help businesses so that persons didn't have to go to multiple agencies anymore. Those are just a few of the F&M solutions created to make life easier in the Bahamas. I have some more to remind this honorable place about in future contributions. Mr. Vice President, my colleagues opposite relentlessly refer to the PLP's blueprint for change. And I'm an open-minded person, so I decided to give it a glance, and I found a very interesting line. It said, "We commit to assisting the most vulnerable in our society. Since its establishment in 1953, a fundamental policy of the PLP was to uplift the downtrodden." Mr. Vice President, maybe it's the lawyer in me, but I submit that jeopardizing the development of education, risking national security, underfunding healthcare, limiting social assistance, increasing electricity costs, increasing the cost of baby cereal, baby food, baby formula, bread, broth, soups, canned fish, cheese, condensed milk, cooking oil, corned beef, evaporated milk, flour, fresh milk, grits, margarine, mayonnaise, mustard, powdered detergent, rice, soup, tomato paste, medicine, diapers, sanitary pads, and tampons, and failing to provide measures to mitigate inflation is the opposite of assisting the most vulnerable in our society. I close with some very poignant words from one of our vice treasurers, Ursula Dean. Ursula said, "The PLP are too busy looking back. They need to realize that they are now in government and act." Mr. Vice President, we continue to wait for this government to take steps to provide relief and protection to our citizens and residents. We are a small archipelagic nation, and yet we feel the weight of economic circumstances beyond our control on our necks. We are a creative and innovative nation. This government, like its predecessor, must come up with a plan to provide relief for our citizens and residents who have been impacted by matters which occur beyond our borders. We are still waiting.
As many The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President, colleagues. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to the issues in the midterm budget 2022. Mr. Vice President, the midterm budget statement speaks to public revenue, capital expenditure, current expenditure, public debt and borrowing, and the impact of the new approach to managing COVID-19 and reopening the economy. Mr. Vice President, I would encourage our fellow Bahamians to access the information on the budget by going to bahamasbudget.gov.bs. Mr. Vice President, as the midterm budget is an exhaustive and detailed financial and accounting report with tentacles that stretch long, wide, and deep, I want to concentrate my remarks to the issues of certain investigations which have been opened up into what is emerging as the most scurrilous pattern and conduct of behavior in this country during the former government's term in office. Mr. Vice President, while these investigations are underway in the public domain, the Bahamian people are freely using the term corruption, public malfeasance in public office. The Bahamian people are, and if anybody want to challenge that.
Point of order, sir. If,
Senator Raming.
yes, you can be seated, Mr. Fiscal. If the member is in his own mouth and in the same breath assuring that investigation is ongoing.
Senator Raming, what is the point of order?
The point of order that the member is clearly misleading the public and has no grounds to continue his suggestion by commenting on matters in which he himself has acknowledged is under current investigation. He would be prejudicing the
Is it a matter before court?
investigation. No, it's an investigation by him himself being acknowledged. Clearly means that the matter is being reviewed and no conclusions have been had. So if he himself is investigating something, he is clearly admitting that they have not finished their due diligence, and it would be improper for him to assert something with such gravity that he himself is acknowledging that they are still reviewing.
Senator Raming, what is the point that is misleading in particular?
The fact is that he continues to comment on something that he himself has not finished his due diligence on. If it is an opinion, then what's the point of the investigation?
No, it's not before the courts, Senator Raming, and I don't understand, Mr. Vice President, the point of order.
I don't think you would.
Mr. Vice President, let me just give the progress report to date of the Davis administration. Mr. Vice President, the Davis administration progress so far: 1, we ended the emergency orders. We ended the curfews, Mr. Vice President. We conducted tens of thousands of free COVID tests. We distributed tens of thousands of free medical graded masks. We ended expensive travel health visa for Bahamians. We hired more nurses, paid healthcare workers what they were owed, Mr. Vice President, allowed all businesses to reopen. We reopened the schools, Mr. Vice President, and tourism is growing. Hotels are filling up and businesses are doing better. So, Mr. Vice President, it is quite disingenuous to suggest, as what my colleague did, that the government is not focusing on opening up the economy. Mr. Vice President, Before I go into the investigations, which
Mr. Vice President, that's not what I said.
Your point of clarification?
Yes,
Go ahead.
that's my senator colleague suggested I said that the government was not focused on the economy. And that is not what I said.
Want to clarify what you did say?
I said that the government was reducing its reoccurring expenses and very important aspects of society without any explanation as to the implications of it.
Mr. Vice President, the one, that is a forecast, right? And two, I think it is very clear to say that the government is being prudent about the coffers. Under the previous administration, the economy was wholly mismanaged. And that is very clear. Mr. Vice President, as I continue, most of the period covered by this statement is based on the previous administration. Only 2.5 months of this administration's time is covered in the statement, Mr. Vice President. The other side is being disingenuous. But early indicators suggest, Mr. Vice President, grounds for optimism and that the economy is now recovering. However, many Bahamians are still struggling. 11,000 households are still receiving food assistance. There is need for more. The relaunch of the RISE program will help with this, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, our fiscal situation to date, we see that revenue is increasing due to more efficient collection after the program at DIR, the Department of Inland Revenue, was disbanded by the previous administration, not due to increased taxes, Mr. Vice President. Expenditure increase is insignificant, especially, Mr. Vice President, considering promotions, return of increments, gratuities paid, rises, and pension increases. Let me be very clear so I can dispel the notion that somehow we're cutting reoccurring budgets, especially considering promotions, return of increments, gratuities paid, rises, and pension increases. Mr. Vice President, it's insignificant that expenditure increases, of the expenditure increases. The ratio of debt to GDP has fallen from 100.2% to 96.4%, Mr. Vice President. That should be commended. And the government continue to be prudent about the coffers. Net fiscal deficit has reduced. Benefits of the above, Mr. Vice President, are that there's an indicator of a stronger economy, improved relationships with creditors and investors, as my colleague, Senator Halkidas, has alluded to. For example, the government repurchase agreement with Goldman Sachs International, as my colleague had alluded to. The difference in confidence is in the numbers, Mr. Vice President. The previous administration was charged 8.95% interest. The administration, this administration, the Davis Cooper administration, was charged only 2.4% interest, Mr. Vice President. That's the real numbers. That's the real numbers. Mr. Vice President, as I said, indicated earlier, the statement, the budget statement, there are many report, and as I indicated, the tentacles are far-reaching, wide, and deep. But I want to continue to focus the rest of my presentation on these investigations. Mr. Vice President, it is at this point I must quote the Honorable Minister of Finance during the midterm budget communication. The Honorable Minister of Finance told the country, and I quote, large sums unaccounted for, running at least into hundreds of millions of dollars of the Bahamian people's money, unqualified and inexperienced individuals chosen to run organizations and departments and projects. Spectacularly unqualified people awarded big contracts for work of questionable value, and sometimes for work which appear never to have been done, the finance minister said. He further went on to say, record keeping, which was completely absent or messy, and structures set up completely outside of the public service with no levels of reporting or accountability to anyone. Bahamians are right to worry about sins worse than incompetence, because there is a common sense question that sits at the heart of this. If spending was so defensible, if the work done was so laudable, why didn't the F&M administration disclose and defend it? End quote. Mr. Vice President, the Minister of Finance goes on to make this unchallenged assertion, and I quote again, and during the whole time, not one single person in the administration or cabinet, including the current leader of the F&M, had the courage and the testicular fortitude to stand up on behalf of the Bahamian people and say what was obvious, that what they were doing was wrong. It wasn't moral. It wasn't legal. End quote. The finance minister asks this essentially important question, Mr. Vice President. Why was the public service and every other experienced major organization excluded? I remind you, we wouldn't be having this conversation or these conversations if they had done what they were supposed to do. I come now to this truly amazing chain of events surrounding, again, the intricate, sweet package deal another F&M crony received from the former administration. And I quote the Minister of Finance, open quote, to compare the almost $5 million in administration fees to that paid to large NGOs and other established organizations is laughable. The chairwoman of the Food Task Force was being paid a salary. In addition, her only member of staff was an assistant who was also being paid by the government. Their expenses for car and phone were also being paid for by the government. They weren't running a building. They didn't have large overheads. So what happened to the almost $5 million in administration fees? End quote. The Minister of Finance asked the former government these very pointed questions. It does not end there. The Minister of Finance states, and I quote again, open quote, the relevant facts in respect of the other schemes highlighted also stand, Mr. Vice President. Who decided after a friendly chat that Canoe should be awarded the travel visa contract? Who decided to open a separate bank account for them? Who allowed them to hang on to approximately $35 million of the Bahamian people's money for 6 months so that, as the Auditor General put it, errors, fraud, or irregularities could possibly go undetected? End quote. Mr. Vice President, this litany of assertions and issues for investigation and unanswered questions have raised red flag of every sensible Bahamian. This is not a political issue, and it is not a blame game football. These are serious and compelling times where today the world is reeling from inflation brought about by the horrendous violence and war in Europe. COVID is mounting again in certain parts of the world, and health experts are bracing for another battle, Mr. Vice President. Our small economy, where we have to borrow to complete our national budgetary allocations, cannot endure, Mr. Vice President, glaring and outrageous departures from standard checks and balances and norms in the public service and in our financial reporting. Mr. Vice President, our small island nation facing the onslaught of climate change and in need of every available financial resources to build our buffers cannot afford for public funds to be carelessly handled and disbursed and the people's money so recklessly thrown around and spent. Mr. Vice President, in our education system, we are learning that hundreds of our little darlings are far behind in their coursework because virtual learning proved to be largely ineffective as schools shut down during the pandemic. This means that we have to allocate even more for schools and teachers and parents and students and communities to catch up. And there are those who have the brazen gall and the nerve and the kahunas to put on the mask of deception and run amok in this town with fake cries about trust and accountability and transparency, while we know people were clawing the eyes of the Bahamian people's head right out in front of us in broad daylight. It would appear, Mr. Vice President, that this trail of investigation has even more doors, which must be inquired into. The Honorable Minister of Finance also alluded to concerns about the huge sum of monies being paid by the former administration to a particular insurance company. Let me quote him, open quotes. Many unanswered questions remain in relation to this health visa scheme, especially in relation to the millions given to an insurance company. For now, we will leave that for another day, but soon enough, the truth will emerge and what transpired so that we know just how friendly those chats were, the Minister of Finance said in his communication. Mr. Vice President, the court of public opinion in this country, Mr. Vice President, does not wait on the process of due course. The court of public opinion sits every hour in this country, and common, ordinary Bahamians from all walks of life discuss what they know, what they hear, and what from them does not seem to add up. Mr. Vice President, I have looked at several studied definitions of corruption, and the one that I want to detail today comes from the International Watchdog Analysis reporting Transparency International. Bahamians are familiar with this organization, and their reports have been the front page headlines of all of the local newspapers in recent years. And I am sure Bahamians concerned with the issues of corruption also go to their webpage to download reports and access data and information. Mr. Vice President, this is Transparency International's definition of corruption, and I quote, "Corruption is a complex social, political, and economic problem which undermines democracy, human rights, and governance by weakening state institutions, eroding public confidence, and hindering the pathway towards sustainable development." Mr. Vice President, it was in 2017 a certain distinguished gentleman traveled outside the country to use that opportunity to tell strangers abroad about what he termed as high levels of corruption in the Bahamas. This gentleman announced that he would not be tolerating corruption, and on his watch, he was going to borrow the phrase from his illustrious predecessor, Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield. and see to it persons who are distinguished gentlemen deemed corrupt would have their backsides prosecuted straight to jail. The gentleman returned home, and it would appear that a special forces unit was extracted from the Royal Bahamas Police Force to carry out these political decisions and certain entities. Mr. Vice President, we know the facts. 3 former officials in the former government were arrested, paraded, shamed, charged, and prosecuted in the courts. As we are a democracy with a long-standing tradition of the rule of law, we waited for the court to air these matters. Today, the facts are easily verifiable. The 3 persons charged under the vengeful and political chaperoning of others have all been fully vindicated by the rule of law. It should be pointed out that subsequent to these vindications, higher courts have awarded the cost of one of these innocent persons' legal defense to be paid by the state for having brought the dubious charges in the first place. The precedent is in play for the other 2. Mr. Vice President, in our adjudication, a magistrate opined that certain public officers had improperly intervened in the protocols of due course process, and those improper interventions were instrumental to certain charges being filed by the Special Forces Corruption Unit of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, given responsibility to attend these political orders from political bosses. Mr. Vice President, the distinguished gentleman who wrapped himself in sheaves of purest white linen.
Point of order.
To the Honorable Darren Henfield.
Mr. Vice, thank you. My learned friend must be fully aware that charges brought before the courts of the Bahamas are done so by Department of Public Prosecutions. One of the first acts we took whilst in government was to ensure, and very careful, you're the Attorney General, you can answer me if I'm wrong. One of the first acts we did was move to ensure that we had an independent Director of Public Prosecutions with whom lied the ability to be the only one to move a nolli prosequi. That was one of the main reasons why we did that. And so to assert that politicians, right? Is he saying that the Attorney General now can direct the Director of Public Prosecutions to bring a charge against someone? Is he saying that? I'm certain he's not saying that.
Senator Henfield, what is your point of order?
My point of order is that the member is misleading and he ought to know better. What he's saying, he's an attorney. He's an attorney called to the practice of law, I think, my senior, because I did something else before I came. All right, he ought to know better. The Director of Public Prosecutions is responsible for laying charges against individuals, not politicians.
You have a reply, Senator Pickstock?
Mr. Vice President, as I said earlier, the President, the Court of Public Opinion, does not wait on the process of due course. The Court of Public Opinion
Senator Pickstock has the floor.
Sits every hour in this country, and common, ordinary people, Bahamians from all walks of life, discuss what they know, what they hear, and what for them does not seem to add up. Mr. Vice President, as I indicated, Mr. Vice President, and I would continue my contribution, the distinguished gentleman who wrapped himself in sheaths of purest white linen cloth and professed his abhorrence to corruption went on to add some titles to his status. He became the most honorable. He became the competent authority. Today, Mr. Vice President, the country bestows on him another glorious title, of which he is also so richly deserving, and that is the title of the most hypocrite. In this midterm budget communication to the Parliament, the Minister of Finance has detailed and revealed certain ongoing investigations underway, which have direct links to decisions, appointments, and policies put in place by the distinguished gentleman, and endorsed and followed by the team he misled for just under 4 years before the Bahamian people summarily fired them without notice. Mr. Vice President, there is a concept in law known as being concerned together. It is a fairly easy concept for any first-year law student to grasp. It all boils down to who are the named parties who took part in the planning and execution of a particular act and were aware at the time of their plan and the commission of acts, what circumstances can flow from their collective actions. I want to reinforce this point, Mr. Vice President, being concerned together. The midterm budget made several assertions on these investigations, which suggest that something untoward may have taken place as it relates to proprietary accountability and transparency. These are the same words used by my colleague on the other side, Senator Michael Ellis. The major areas of investigation are as follows: the national feeding program during the COVID lockdown and the economic downturn on the nation, which led to joblessness, 1. 2, the travel visa program and the Ministry of Tourism's suspicious hiring of a private company called Canoe to administer and hold government's revenue in its private accounts. 3, the parks and playgrounds issues where serious missteps are being alleged. There are other areas of concern, such as private agencies being contracted to hold and collect funds for the state-owned National Insurance Board, the same National Insurance Board that my colleague, Senator Michael Ellis, highlighted or alluded to. Mr. Vice President, the question in my mind is, did the competent authority act alone, or was he aided and abetted by persons who were concerned together with him to the decisions which were made and the policies undertook, which now lead to these important inquiries?
Chair recognizes Senator Henfield. What is the point of order?
Imputation of improper motives. You know, yeah. You know, what he's asserting is that those of us who sat in the cabinet were complicit in wrongdoing. I will not sit here and take that. I mean, this is almost a point of privilege as far as I'm concerned. So we have to be very careful when we stand up and begin to make certain imputations on the character of individuals. You know, your AG and your Minister of Economic Affairs can tell you how cabinet runs, you know. There is a collective responsibility.
Yes, there is.
There is a collective responsibility. All right? And we share that collective responsibility.
Yes.
But do not impute to us acts of wrongdoing without the evidence. Without the evidence. Let the evidence come forward first. And if you find the evidence, use the evidence. Don't do that, my brother. That's not right. We deserve better than that, man.
Senator Pickstock, do you care to elucidate what you were saying?
No, I don't, because he made it very clear that they are concerned together and it's collective responsibility, and that was my point. So there's no need for me to further, elaborate on that point, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I am particularly tickled by the new game, the new hairs of the political party to which the distinguished gentleman handled, browbeat, and arrogantly stamped into absolute submission for 4 years. You know, Mr. Vice President, this seemed to be the gene pool of the political entity. They also had another leader who boasted he was a one-man band. The irony is that they got rid of the distinguished right honorable gentleman because they said he was autocratic. Look what they got when they were tired of what they had. Well, Mr. Vice President, the survivor of the 16 September 2021 train wreck are now saying we must move on. The people have replaced them The time is now to just get on with it and let bygones be bygones. And we forgot about it. This is amazing. These leaders who sat and twiddle their thumbs while their government behave in a manner as outlined in the summary of these ongoing investigations think we should just all move on, sweep it under the carpet. After all, it's a new day. Let's forget about it. An investigation into whether high crimes and misdemeanors took place. Well, cut my legs and call me shorty. These same politicians who are now playing the "it wasn't me" game sat on the sidelines, licking their lips and giving high fives while 3 PLP politicians were shackled at the ankles, their wrists, and paraded for international.
Point of order.
The chair recognizes Senator Henfield.
No.
What is the point of order, Senator Henfield?
Improper imputations.
Can you clarify?
I don't have to clarify that. That's pure. That's obvious what he's saying, Mr. Vice President.
You
What
need
he's
to
saying
state
is
it
that
for the
we were
record. What are you
complicit.
stating?
What he's saying is that we were complicit, some of us, in the prosecution of politicians. And you know, I just stood here and elucidated in this honorable place how prosecutions come about. But he persists on doing that. And you must stop him, you know. You must rule this place fairly and according to the rules. Other than that, it don't make sense us coming here, you know.
Thank you.
Please.
Senator Pickstock, would you clearly state in your contribution who you are speaking of in terms of dealings with the prosecutions?
Mr. Vice President, I would simply say the facts are the facts, right? What I mean by that is this, that the politicians to whom I alluded to were shackled at the ankles, their wrists, and paraded for international, social, and local coverage, with heavy armed police escort into the courts on what can only now be deemed to have been trumped up charges. Trumped up, Mr. Vice President. Charges political in scope and nature and vicious and personal in their delivery. I am reminded of the words of the distinguished right honorable gentleman to whom I referred earlier. The rapid got begun. Mr. Vice President, this pretends as if they do not hold collective responsibility for what the competent authority transacted just boggles my mind, Mr. Vice President. This can only be the behavior and the modus operandi of persons who were concerned together and complicit in the commission of acts, which now leads to these investigations. Mr. Vice President, the Minister of Finance, in tabling the mid-term budget, said millions of dollars of the people's money was being channeled through entities and sources that were not lawfully entitled to do so, and who lacked basic skills and training to do the same. What I find most egregious in this entire exercise, Mr. Vice President, is the National Feeding Program was turned over to a private entity, NGOs, Mr. Vice President. The skilled, the trained professionals, staff in the Ministry of Social Services were not allowed to go near the program. They had no input in it whatsoever. I cry shame on the Minister of Social Services for not standing up against the draconian decisions of the competent authority and for the ministry, for his ministry. I cry shame on all of the other persons who left their backbone in Russell Square every Tuesday before they took the elevator to the cabinet room. And now they want to tell the Bahamian people that voting them out of office is sufficient punishment and we should just let bygones be bygones and get on with it. The Bahamian people are trying to broker their cynicism with our system. The Bahamian people are sick and tired of being sick and tired of privilege in the Bahamas, of the powerful and the connected getting away repeatedly, Mr. Vice President. No one is above the law. We heard this week we heard this weak apologetic kissing up excuse the other day about why the country must put on mittens to talk about NGOs. We were told that criticisms of how the program was ran and administered is sure to lead NGOs to turn their backs on future work. Mr. Vice President, for a salary of $1,750 per week and 4% of a budget of 53 million, which is another 4 million presumably, for administrative costs and fees, I can think of hundreds of NGOs who will volunteer to do the job for free and to do it more effectively, efficiently, and resourcefully. Cheap grits, generic sugar, and no brand name rice, no one ever heard of, along with unhealthy bovine bones packaged as corned beef and rations of raw shredded chicken. I am sure, Mr. Vice President, that the disgraceful standards and indecencies and indignities visited on our people were not warranted. And I do not want anybody to tell me this nonsense about how government was just trying to get something done in the crisis. I reject that posture. The government of yesterday making those decisions were guided according to my research and investigations, Mr. Vice President, by the appointment of their top shelf financial contributors to the FNM. Prior to this appointment, the named person in charge of the feeding network had absolutely no experience or public record which reflect involvement with any such or similar charitable feeding program and of her socialization with the marginalized. The singing bishop, Lawrence Roll, the national feeding the poor champion, Reverend Walter Hanschel, religious leaders, Abe Berkeley Pilgrim, the Red Cross, and a number of churches in this country whose outreach in feeding the needy was in place before the word COVID was ever coined. But here we see what happened, and we can all estimate or rationalize what happened. After all, $53 million may be just too much money for certain of us to handle. And I make no apologies for that remark. As in the case of the parks and playgrounds debacle, it was a grab all pinata. Grab all pinata. Strike the bag, and just how much can you drop out? That's yours. Mr. Vice President, these are matters under investigation. There are no matters under review as to whether there is a cause for an investigation. These are matters that are live and active, and prima facie case has been laid. Mr. Vice President, these are issues so fundamental that they ought to require the political party to hold its own internal disciplinary procedures with a view of censoring, suspending, and expelling certain persons from their ranks who have brought them into such rascality and public odium and shame. Mr. Vice President, they have no shame. No shame. The person who sat in the chair at Parks and Playground is elevated to a high-level post, and the former minister to whom a minister...
Senator Anfield, what is the point of order?
This member continues to bring ill repute to the names and characters of members of Parliament. Only one person sat in the chair as chairman for parks and beaches. No, I'm not going to be distracted by you, Attorney General. No charges have been brought against the member. The last I heard, there are ongoing investigations into the food program, into beaches and parks, into some other. No, that's not what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
No, what you're saying is that you're imputing corruption to the member of Parliament, who is now our deputy leader of the party.
How many times?
That ain't my business. That's not here or there. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your imputation that the member is corrupt. And you must withdraw that, man. That's wrong. He said it. He said it.
Senator Enfield.
And he said, He's imputing it, and he's asserting it. And he said that we went ahead then and elected the man deputy leader of the party.
Senator
That's so
Henfield,
wrong.
your point of order is noted. You can return to your seat. Senator Pickstock, would you clearly outline what you are saying in reference to the member?
Mr. Vice President, I didn't say that the member is corrupt. Senator Henfield just said that, not me.
Well, you're going to continue to make a mockery of this place.
Right? I did not
Just
say that.
continue to
All
make a
I said-
mockery.
Can you restate or clarify, elucidate exactly what you are saying?
The person who sat in the chair, and I quote,
And allow my colleagues
at
to
parks
allow-
and playgrounds
Senator Henfield, Senator Pickstock has the floor. Senator Henfield.
is elevated to a high-level post, and the former minister to whom a chief magistrate opined exercised undue influence in a particular police action is also elevated to a new post. That is that.
So what does that mean?
Right?
What does that mean?
Is if it is as if Bahamian people are just being taken for a fool, Mr. Vice
That's what
President.
it meant?
We know the old Bahamian way. We say this will blow over. People have a short memories. Mr. Vice President, this state of affairs in our country has to change. It was just 6 months ago, all over the country, there were these red signs with the words trust, T-R-U-S-T, in bold letters on the lampposts and the road verges and trees, on buildings, on vehicles, on T-shirts and social media. We, Mr. Vice President, have you heard the new leader of Trust team advocate support for the investigation? Has anyone heard the new leader on the national chairman or the national chairman appeal to all and sundry to be cooperative with the investigation? Has any former F&M cabinet minister, parliamentary secretary, or MP come forward with information to assist the investigation? This happened on their watch. This is their free national mess. If they are serious about cutting out the cancer of corruption and laying stronger foundations for transparency and accountability, they have a duty to show it by their actions. Now, Mr. Vice President, we are talking about investigation. It's into millions of dollars of the people's money. It is the people's money. We are talking about decisions and policies which go against the grain in just about every political administration since the 1965 Constitution. And I can tell you, Mr. Vice President, Bahamians are drawing some very serious, very, and seemingly parallels between who landed mega dollar contracts from the F&M government and who were also major financiers of the party. The Minister of Finance has stated very frankly that his is a sworn duty to do his job and to straighten out this situation and report to the Bahamian people. There will be consequences, the Minister of Finance said. If we were to tackle corruption and stamp it out, it will require leaders of goodwill, tenacity, and principle. How can anyone who sat around the table, you know, the table where the gentleman faked his signature on the bogus oil deal for East Grand Bahama? These, Mr. Vice President, these are the times which try men's souls. Seriously. And yet we had this cavalcade of red signage asserting trust. We were told that no criticism should be made of certain persons or NGOs because we need them to step forward more readily when the budget is $53 million with a 4% cut and a $1,750 weekly salary. Mr. Vice President, this is scandalous. The Bahamian people will lose full faith in our tested system of governance if these issues were without consequences. Where are the receipts? From whom was the grocery, dairy, and meat, poultry purchased? Give us a breakdown of how the 4% administrative fee was allocated and spent. In the case of Canoe, how did such a Stephen King horror deal ever come about? For what purpose was government revenue in the millions of dollars held in a private bank account. Were these private accounts used to achieve other benefits and perks? Mr. Vice President, many years ago, I recall there was this stinking scandal on contracts for advertising and public relations by a government ministry, where investigations had determined that a high-ranking official in that ministry was the beneficial owner of the advertising and public relations company. The Bahamian people waited for due process. They waited for justice to not only be done, but to seem to be done. Nothing happened, Mr. Vice President. Everyone retreated to their natural corner and crazy glued their lips. Jesse James got away again in broad daylight. You'll remember the case of the chairman of the public board who gave his company all of the road hot mix contracts. The time has come for this nation and leaders to make the change. We have to put in place the tough regulatory regime and the oversight commissions and committees whose duty it is to protect the nation against corruption in public office. We should create huge rewards for whistleblowers who bring these agents of corruption before public scrutiny. Corruption is not a PLP problem. It is not an F&M problem. It is a national Bahamian problem. It may very well be that there is no sphere in our national fabric which is not touched by corruption. Members of Parliament have gone to jail and have been convicted. Magistrates have gone to jail. And quite frankly, it just makes us as a country and as a people look weak, insincere, and untrustworthy. What is the manner of our bearing, Mr. Vice President? What is our lofty goal? Next year, we turn 50 years old, and these development handicaps must be put behind us. In 2019, Transparency International Global Corruption Barometer found that 80% of citizens of the Bahamas considered corruption in government to be an important issue. A report said, and I quote, although the current government is concentrating efforts in promoting integrity and transparency, there is still a need to address these concerns and strengthen the Bahamas legal framework. End quote. What we have witnessed in the last 4+ years was the inability of our ancient political system to prove without a shadow of a doubt that there are honorable men and women in honorable places, and we take our duties seriously. For 4 full years, from the bogus contract signing in the Cabinet Office to the mishandling of post-Dorian disaster to emergency orders and the National Food Program debacle, and continuing to the travel visa controversy and the stretching its grimy hands to the awards of amazing sums of money in parks and playgrounds, there are many who sat in silence and consent to what was swirling around them. And no, not one took a stand for honesty and transparency and good governance. Not one F&M able to drag the slippers of that great Bahamian patriot, Carlton Elijah Francis, who gave it all away because, rightly or wrongly, there is a path which honorable men must take. Mr. Vice President, I am grateful for this opportunity.
As many the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Maxine Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You know, Mr. Vice President, following Senator Hickstock and his expansive literary appreciation, along with his disparaging dictionary that he consults each time before Senate and digs up the lowest of the words in the vocabulary. You know, it's here that I want to say that I'm very pleased and always happy to rise in this honorable place on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And every time we assemble, I hope that we could take one step closer to creating a Bahamas for all Bahamians. So much has happened since we last gathered, Mr. Vice President. We've had triumphs and trials. Of course, we've lost a former visitor to this place, Carissa Culmer, I must call her name, who has left a precious toddler behind and really highlighted for us the need for us to place greater priority on gender-based violence and human rights in general as a matter of urgency. So I was pleased to hear the Attorney General recently state that his office is working on a suite of legislation on human rights. I would like at this time, Mr. Vice President, to commend the Bahamas Crisis Center, Women United, FOAM, Nassau Chapter of Links, Incorporated, Bahamas Urban Youth Development Center, Pace School, and all the other countless civic organizations and churches who work moment by moment to protect women and children. March, Mr. Vice President, is Social Work Month. So I would like to say congratulations to all social workers on their newly formed Social Workers Association that will be able to bargain on behalf of social workers across the profession, because social workers, Mr. Vice President, are often overlooked, overworked, and underappreciated. So I want to thank them all for what they do to help persons and improve our society in various ways. Of course, our country has recently been through and continues to go through so much: natural disasters, economic challenges, and social ills. And so I encourage all social workers to get involved with the new association, because of course we can do more when we unite. It's also Kidney Awareness Month this month, and so I'd like to commend the Bahamas Kidney Association, a nonprofit that really focuses on assisting the hundreds of Bahamian families who struggle with kidney illness. Mr. Vice President, yesterday marked 4 years since a former parliamentarian passed away. Senator, Member of Parliament, and Cabinet Minister, the late Honorable Teresa Moxie Ingram, who, as I've said before in this honorable place, served as my mentor and mother, to whom I'm forever grateful. I would like to encourage all of us to do likewise and to make time to make a difference, to pour into another life, and not to become so busy with our schedules that we don't have time to impact the next generation. As you would have alluded to, as well as my good colleague here, we're happy to have Waynisha Saunders here with us today. She is a youth advocate who is well on her way to Parliament, in my estimation, and it's important that we mentor young persons like Waynisha to help guide them on their way. Mr. Vice President, I attended church yesterday, and it was a good thing, especially after the Honorable Senator's contribution. And when the service concluded, a fellow church member and sister introduced me to a grandmother, Bathsheba Bowe, who's actually named who she's named after. And her 82-year-old grandmother, Bathsheba Bowe, who was visiting from Eleuthera, I was thrilled to meet her because I love children and elderly people. And so when she told her grandmother that I serve in the Senate, her grandmother squeezed my arm and leaned in to whisper to me something. And I have to say, I was astonished at what she said, astonished in a good way. She said to me that before she sleeps, she hopes to see the House of Assembly filled with just women. You know, and I could not believe my ears, because that really caught me off guard from this 82-year-old. But it's good to know that multiple generations of Bahamians realize the invaluable contribution that women make to our society and how we can add value to leadership. So I pray we hasten our advancement so Ms. Bowe will be able to see the progress we have made before she sleeps, as she put it. We have a ways to go, of course, when it comes to gender equality and equity and eliminating all forms of gender discrimination that exist in our laws. In fact, my mentor, the late Honorable Teresa Moxie Ingram, worked alongside Ruby Nottage as one of the commissioners for the Bahamas Constitutional Commission in 2014. And those two ladies traveled our country really trying to educate our people on the importance of gender equality. While their efforts were unsuccessful, I really hope that we will be making strides in this area very soon. Mr. Vice President, we are here to discuss the mid-year budget performance for the 6 months ending the 31st day of December 2021. This budget reflects two administrations and is a great example of what we often say, and that's that government is continuous. We know that the Minnis administration governed from July to September last year, while the Davis administration went through to December of that same year. But as East Grand Bahama MP Kwesi Thompson puts it, the Minnis government policies resulted in fiscal improvements being seen for the 6-month period. Let's just face it, nothing significant happens in 3 months. So what we are discussing here today is really not a new day budget, in fairness.
Mr. Vice President, on a point of order, please.
Chair recognizes Senator Ryan Pindo.
I take offense at the proposition that nothing material happens in 3 months. We ended. Yeah,
He's stating what the point of order is.
I take point. The member.
Sorry,
the member is misleading the public.
No, the point of order actually. No, if you actually look at the Senate rules, the senators shall not use offensive language. So the fact that he said he takes offense, that is a point of order.
2 point of orders.
It is.
To say.
You can look at Rule 31:13. Did you say he was offensive? Did you say he was offensive?
No.
Senator Ryan Pinder, you have the floor.
To say that nothing material can happen in 3 months is completely misleading and offensive. Remove the emergency orders. 1 day into the administration, the curfew was removed. Restaurants were allowed to open. Places of nighttime amenities were allowed to open. Businesses are open. The tourism market took off. All of this is because of their administration, who refused to lift the state of emergency and had a curfew on the backs of Bahamian people up until the day of the election. I take offense to that. Everything we did in the first 3 months was to find ourselves where we are today, with Bahamians working, with free COVID tests, the lowest COVID positivity rate since the pandemic began.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I asked the member to withdraw that statement.
Senator Maxine Seymour.
Mr. Vice President, if he allows, I will go on to show what it is that I am saying, because I'm happy that he expounded on that. And we will see that what happened in the first 6 months of the 2021-2022 budget year in terms of increased revenue collection and the uptick in the economy was based on the previous administration and some policies that were put into place. For example, home porting. And I will go on to discuss this if I would so be allowed.
Wonderful vaccination program.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Vice President, the uptick that was due to some of the initiatives, like I said, that were implemented by the previous administration, like home porting.
Senator Maxine Seymour has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And so during the midterm that we are discussing, there was increased tourism activity during that period with more travel than normal, because people who could not travel during the winter months, where they traditionally travel, say January to April, because of the pandemic, they started traveling in June and July. So our economic activity picked up. And I must point out, for my good fellow senator here, that this was while we were still under lockdown and curfews. And so we have to be careful, little airs what we hear and little mouths what we say. Because we would want people to believe, or they would want people to believe, that a relaxation in the restrictions is what led to the tourism activity. And I do not, listen, the reality is I don't know if their confusion, Mr. Vice President, reflects a lack of integrity or competency, but what I would say is that the pickup in terms of the increased tourism activity happened from the first quarter of that fiscal. And so in the first quarter, we saw tourism booming, and we saw cases starting to drop in the North American market, Mr. Vice President, which is our biggest tourism market. Cruise ships started home porting out of the Bahamas, which, even though we want to rewrite history, did happen. and air travel and overnight stays, at least one room night coming into the country happened. And that's the budget we're discussing. That's what happened during the time period, which we're here to discuss today. And so a large part of the bump in the first quarter was due to the VAT revenues, which went up because of the tourism sector. The hotels, the food consumption, VAT on water sports and tours and stuff. It was a fairly active period that led to an uptick in revenue. Mr. Vice President, the fact of the matter is that our country welcomes over 7 million visitors each year. And it's tourism spending in our economy in any given period that helps us to thrive. So obviously, when you take the tourists away, our economy hurts. Tourism is the largest contributor to tax in our country, and that's just a fact. Now, we want to debate that. People in October, on September 17, they went to Expedia.com and all decided they'll book to come in the next couple weeks. They didn't have to plan their vacation, didn't have to plan their trips, didn't have to budget or anything. They all just decided they were coming all of a sudden, right? But the reality is that foreigners are the greatest consumer of goods and services in the Bahamas. And obviously, when they're not traveling, as we saw during the pandemic, our GDP declines. That's just a fact. We don't mass export goods like other countries. Our country exports a service, but that service is dependent on people coming here. Mr. Vice President, the uptick we saw in the first half of our fiscal year was because more visitors were consuming goods and services in our beloved country and paying VAT. That was not from locals alone, and certainly not because of any, policy that was suddenly implemented. So let's not take away from the former administration, which is what we see him insisting on doing here, because the reality is that, regardless of how eloquent our colleagues are in this noble place, the former administration had a lot to do with the midterm budget that we're discussing here today. Okay? We were the beneficiaries of international circumstances coupled with initiatives like home porting that was introduced by the previous administration led by the Nassau Cruise Port. The hotel sector also played a big role in marketing special hotel packages during this time, Mr. Vice President, in order to get heads in beds. So they encourage people to fly in earlier and leave later. And so we know what was done, okay? So my question to this good administration is, what have you done to create optimism now? Let's talk about now. We saw the uptick in revenue during the first quarter prior to the relaxation of measures. So imagine what we could see now as health and safety measures are further relaxed. I'm grateful to God, Mr. Vice President, and to the last administration, because during that first quarter, our country needed the uptick, okay? And the second quarter, October to December, is our normally active period. Mr. Vice President, shifting a bit, while I acknowledge the push for increased revenue collection, the government cannot be a one-hit wonder. Top the charts for that big hit, and then no one hears about the group anymore after that. We need fundamental changes and shifts in our revenue collection process. I note the Prime Minister's points on intended changes to the Department of Inland Revenue in terms of the big buck contributors to taxes, but there's more to be done, okay? There are significant arrears when it comes to real property tax. That's just a fact, in other taxes. And even if we achieve 100% collection right now, we still need a plan to ensure that there's continued collection going forward. So we changed the valuation and push for collection, but like I said, we have to have a long-term plan that's sustainable, okay? And so what are you putting in place to make sure that property owners stay current? How will we sustain these efforts without improving the quality of information systems and people who are collecting the taxes? There won't be any improvement. So we need a clear evaluation policy and to complete the comprehensive map, GPS, so that we are not just conducting business haphazardly. I'm very concerned that the recent reassessments, Mr. Vice President, greatly impacted some property owners, and that is why we need a clear policy. It is also important that the government does not act in contravention to any laws or policies, so we need to acknowledge the concerns of BRIA in terms of the government's decision to utilize teletechnology to provide appraisal services, as the Real Estate Brokers and Salesmen Act of 1995 prohibits any person from the practice of real estate business, including undertaking appraisals, without a valid license issued under the Act. So as you see, we have work to do, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the budget in particular, I went through this page by page, line by line for the people of the Bahamas. But I have to say that the numbers really don't say much because we don't know where they're rooted. And having worked at 2 publicly traded companies and at a global bank, I have to say that we need to move toward having a proper management discussion and analysis, in order to contextualize some of these figures. Because, without that, we really can't say what is what. We could look at it and we could say this ministry got more than this ministry got a little less, this ministry took away. Oh, wow, they spend that much on salaries. I see that they pay this on other expenses, but we really can't speak to the root of the numbers. And so our budget doesn't speak to programs as such that citizens can watch and see how they develop. They're just numbers. And it really wouldn't fly in the private sector. So we need to get to the point
On a point of order,
where there's some
Mr. Vice
debriefing.
President.
The chair recognizes Senator Ryan Pinder.
I know the good senator, this is her first time in this place. And I know she hasn't had the benefit of a budget exercise in which you go line by line. The other colleagues who have been here know this. Line by line, they have the ability to question the appropriate minister, line by line, expenditure by expenditure, to get a basis and support for why that is in the budget. That occurs every year at the budget exercise in May, June. So I'm sure that the good member in May and June, we'll probably see it in June, will appreciate that opportunity exists. And it happens every year for those of us who have stood in the other place and sat there until 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, just because we're doing and fulfilling the obligations as the member wants us to fulfill. So the member is clearly misleading the Bahamian public.
Okay.
Clearly misleading the Bahamian public because this happens yearly in the budget exercise.
Yes, point of explanation, Senator.
What was that? Was that a
Senator
point of
Pinder,
order?
that was a point of
Clarification,
explanation.
Point of explanation? Or you just wanted to say something? Okay, I see. What I am saying here and what I will continue to assert as a recommendation, Mr. Vice President, is we're in a new day now, Mr. Vice President. Okay? And what I'm suggesting is that when we present these whether it's the mid-year or the overall budget, we need to contextualize it. Let's not talk about what happened in the past. Let's talk about how we can improve going forward. And so the point of the matter is that without any real benefit of the whole debriefing for this, it's difficult to really speak to the numbers, okay? And that's just a fact. And I don't think I said anything that was misleading in any way. And so, Mr. Vice President, I am happy to hear the Minister of State say I'm about to compliment the New Day government. So I hope they're listening in for this. I'm happy to hear them talk about the RISE program coming back. And it's just a simple digitization of a social system. And we look at different key factors, right? Who has running water, electricity, and you do the assessment and then you determine how much funds to give them, top the debit card, and it's just like a rolling assessment after that. Here's my greatest challenge, Mr. Vice President. This government removed 0 VAT rating on bread basket items and medicine, right? And the debate continues. Some experts say that consistent VAT rating is the most efficient approach. We know that we're in a rough time, inflation and other things, and people are suffering. And so my thing is, voters were told that the VAT would be reduced to 10%, but they weren't told that the VAT would be added to the bread basket and medicine ahead of time. And we really have to get to a point, Mr. Vice President, where we tell voters the full story and move past all the trickery that comes with the election, in order to, and I didn't say that.
Mr. Vice President, on a point of clarification for the member.
Chair recognizes Senator Ryan Pinder.
So on this issue of bread basket items, right? One, I'm happy after the lunch break to table, I think it's a IMF report on fewer exemptions causes higher rate of collection. I'm happy to table that after the lunch break. So it's not some made up philosophy, right? Not at all. And then secondly, let me tell you who the true benefits of 0 rating is, right? Who the true benefits of 0 rating is. The food stores, because they're generating VAT refunds at a 0 rating. The hotels, because they're buying more of the breadbasket items than actually Bahamian consumers are, not paying VAT on that. The revenue loss by the misguided decision of the former administration to zero rate these items, if they wanted the Bahamian consumer, to appreciate the benefit,
I'm not sure what
to appreciate the benefit on breadbasket.
Senator Ryan Pinder is on his feet on a
They
point
would
of
have
order. You will have an
exempted that
opportunity to
and
speak.
caused the food stores to have a higher cost of business for the benefit of the people. Instead, they gave
Senator
refunds
Henfield, he is stating his point of order. If you would listen to him, it's a point of clarification and elucidation.
Remember, the rules does not permit.
Senator Henfield, I have not recognized you. You do not have the floor. You do not have the floor, Senator Henfield. You do not have the floor, Senator Henfield.
Can clarify.
Senator Ryan Pinder, continue on your point of order.
Thank you. So the member is intentionally misleading the public. When they initially proposed removing VAT on breadbasket items, you know what the former side did? They actually made it exempt, which would have been the right decision until the food store owners and everybody else lobbied them to make it zero rated so they would get refunds instead of a higher cost of doing business.
Thank you, Senator Pinder. Senator Seymour.
I'm very happy to have had the good AG explain that, because he is taking me exactly where it is I want to go. So the reality is that I acknowledged, and I'm not sure if it's just that I am not speaking at a volume at which he could hear, but I did say that some experts say that this, consistency in terms of the VAT is something that is recommended. However, and I'm happy that he pointed out that the food stores and hotels and others were benefiting. So now that they're collecting the 10%, Mr. Vice President, on the breadbasket items, my question is, where is the 10%? Because in the supplemental budget, this government said that they will redirect those funds in terms of increased revenue generated toward the people who need it most, in terms of those who are vulnerable in our society and are being impacted by this extra VAT that is being charged on breadbasket items and on medicine. So my question is this, Mr. Vice President. Just as this particular administration was in such a haste to get to January 1 in order to get this VAT sorted out, why weren't they in an equal haste to get RISE implemented? Because they should have been done simultaneously, Mr. Vice President. So that the same way that they get this extra money from the hotels, from the food stores, from the people who could afford it, the people who shop at the organic, fresh food stores around town, that money should be redirected towards social service assistance through the RISE program. But we're just getting to the RISE program. Why didn't we rush to the RISE program the same way we rushed to the VAT, the same way we rushed to reduce the 10% and to add the 10%? That's the way we should rush to get those funds to the people who need it most. Are we going to get it to them retroactive when RISE finally comes up and running? Because RISE is not new, Mr. Vice President. RISE has been in place. So then couldn't we just get it reactivated with the same January 1 deadline? And if not, Mr. Vice President, what was the haste for January 1? Perhaps they should have given themselves enough time or more time in order to get RISE to be implemented simultaneously with the VAT on breadbasket items, so that we could get help to those who are hurting, the vulnerable, the people who can't afford it, the people below the poverty line, like the Minister of Social Services likes to continuously allude to. The gap between the introduction of the VAT, the 10% VAT on breadbasket items in medicine, and the introduction or reintroduction of the RISE program is too wide, and it's not fair. And so they should have been done simultaneously. And I'm happy you made that point, that the additional funds are coming in, because now we need to take those additional funds and get them to the people who need it most. And we need to get it to them now, in a hurry, with haste.
Yes.
Let's act with the same haste we acted to bring the VAT legislation to this good place.
Yes.
Okay? So let's get it to the people, Mr. Vice President. Let's walk hand in hand with the people. Let's get it to them. Let's walk and chew gum. Yeah. Good Senator. The same way we could do the VAT, but let's do the RISE. Let's get it going, okay? Put the same effort into it, okay? And when the New Day government was in opposition, they could have been planning and preparing so when they governed, so that everything could have happened at the same time. And even if it wasn't perfection, start with the list from NIB, start with the list from social services, take a tactical approach, and then work toward the long-term strategy. But let's get hope and help to the people now, okay? Mr. Vice President, on another matter, many ministers in that other place have told of planned capital spending, hospitals, clinics, prisons, roadworks, airports, ports, and those things require money, significant sums of money. So my question is, where is the money coming from? Obviously the New Day government has a money tree planted somewhere, and all I need is a location, a GPS, Mr. Vice President, so that I could go and pick some leaves as well, because that could really help me in my budget, my personal budget. And so we wait to see where some of these funds are coming from. And so, Mr. Vice President, while the debt to GDP is down to the mid-90s, I think it's 96% or so, we are still not where we need to be as a country. And this isn't a partisan issue. So we need to push to get to where we need to be. Okay, and we're hearing a lot of promises made around the huge expenditure, like I say, for capital, expenses, but I don't see yet where it's coming from. And of course, the original budget that was laid last year, it had more funds allocated for capital expenditure. And of course, we reduced it in the supplemental budget. And I would just like to say again, that we have to move toward a more comprehensive budget presentation, regardless if it's the overall budget or the midterm budget, because the people deserve that. And that's not on anyone in particular. So whatever miracle program this government plans to run, I need in on it, Mr. Vice President, because I don't see the capital expenditure allotted for. And even if it's public-private partnerships that they're talking about, my question is, what is the government contributing? Because the government has to contribute something. Because even if we do that, then what are we going to do? Allow the private sector to be responsible for revenue collection, and we forego the revenue? So we need to understand a little bit more about how these capital expenditures are going to occur. Mr. Vice President, the government boasts of restoring confidence and positivity, but they don't really say how. And fellow senators, actually, more than one of them, said the same thing that the Prime Minister said. And they talk about this Goldman Sachs. I never heard Goldman Sachs. Everywhere I turn, Mr. Vice President, that's all I could hear about. And I really want to take a moment to discuss this deal, Mr. Vice President, okay? And so in preparation, what I did is I shopped around some local commercial banks to see what loans were out there and what could we do, okay? And the banks I approached, Mr. Vice President, they all had different interest rates and terms depending on the type of loan that I was inquiring about, okay? Now, this was talked about a little earlier, Mr. Vice President, and it was all relevant, but now it might not be quite relevant for some. And so, Mr. Vice President, okay, they know full well that they're not comparing apples to apples when they talk about this Goldman Sachs deal and the previous administration's loan. They know that. In fact, they're not even comparing apples to sugar apples, Mr. Vice President. There's really just no comparison between the two loan facilities. No comparison at all, okay? And in fact, if they wanted to compare this particular repo deal to something, then they could probably compare it to the previous government's $252 million emergency loan from the IMF, which we drew against our rights. And that was secured at, I think, 1.054%. And in that particular transaction, Mr. Vice President, we didn't lose any money up front. In this Goldman Sachs deal, the government lost 12% of the value of the collateral up front as a fee. And then we are paying 2.4 interest rate, okay? So, and we have an obligation, Mr. Vice President, to pay back the securities in 24 months at whatever the price is at that time. So God knows if it is higher than the selling price, then we lose again, okay? And this is a cash secured loan, which is effectively that what it is, because the U.S. government, and I'll tell you why I call it that effectively, if he'd allow me, because U.S. government shares liquidate on a daily basis, Mr. Vice President. And I'll tell you that I really believe with all my heart, Goldman Sachs would have given the same loan to any other country. So it's not a show of confidence in our government. If you get a cash loan, why is that a show of confidence? Mr. Vice President, if I walk out the Senate right now and someone give me 10 for 10, I can take it as long as I check it first and it don't look counterfeit to me.
Mr.
That's
Vice
not a show
President,
of confidence.
point of order. The member's misleading the public. The point is, Mr. Vice President, we have saved Bahamian people millions of dollars through this innovative financing arrangement. But having said that, the real point of the matter is they went through 4 years of high interest rate borrowing without even trying to think outside the box to bring a preferential rate of borrowing to the country on their sovereign debt. That's the real point.
Just mention
That with it, no, listen to what I say very carefully now. Sovereign debt, not taking special drawing rights out of the IMF. They're completely different things. You talk about apples and sugar apples. You know those two aren't even remotely connected. Remotely connected. The point is, the way we govern is through innovation and efficiencies and to lower the cost of the Bahamian people. The way they governed, and that's why they sit there and we sit here, is best they can do is to do what was done before. And we've seen where that has gotten us. It's gotten us into a hole. So it is the ingenuity of the Ministry of Finance and the member that is the point to be reconciled here. That's the point.
I don't know what point it is.
You have the floor, Senator Maxine Seymour.
Mr. Vice President, and I'm happy that he said that. He knows just as well as he is trying to imply that I know that this comparison that they continue to make, that there's no comparison. Because the 8.95% loan that was unsecured, that had to do with our credit rating, okay, and whether or not they were willing to entertain us as creditors, and this 2.4% is contrast indeed, okay, because the 2.4%, oh, that's what you're trying to do, shut me down based on time, my good senator friend? They're not comparable. They're not comparable at all, Mr. Vice President, okay? Because at the end of the day, we lost 12% up front. We lost 12% up front, and it's a secured loan, okay? And I'll tell you what I found out. Since I did my research, Mr. Vice President, with the commercial banks, and I asked the commercial banks, okay, what is it that it costs for this? What is it that it costs for that, Mr. Vice President? And they told me, Mr. Vice President, what it costs for various loans if I decide to get a loan for a vehicle, if I get a loan for a mortgage, if I get a loan for something else. And they told me what it would cost for a loan that I could get in terms of cash. They told me 110%. I could wrap. They told me.
If you want to speak after lunch, you can.
Yeah, because all these points of order.
You want a good liquor? No. You want a good liquor?
That's fine. If listen, Mr. Vice President, a hungry man is an angry man, and if my good senators here need to eat, then I am willing to yield. I'm willing to yield for the lunchtime.
10 minutes.
I'm willing to yield.
Senator Seymour, if you can just let the chair know how much more time you need, we would accommodate that. Okay.
Thank you for having my back.
Yes. Please continue.
Someone needs to move the motion.
Beyond the.
Go ahead.
No, I just would like to move a motion to extend into the lunch break to give the honorable member enough time to wrap up her contribution.
Is there a second? Okay. All those in favor of extending beyond the lunch hour, please say aye. All those opposed? Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You know, the less disruption, I have to say that the quicker we can all eat, you know? So Mr. Vice President, you know, as I did my research with the commercial banks, okay, they told me, they told me, okay, this loan, you have up to 12 years, this loan is this interest rate, this loan, etc. But I asked them about a cash secured loan, and let me clarify that why I call it a cash secured loan is because the U.S., you know, stocks are traded regularly, okay? You could liquefy them in no time, okay? And they told me that if I want to put down my fixed deposit, I need to put 10% additional. So that means I have an $11,000 fixed deposit. I get $10,000 in return. And you know what they told me in the bank? I asked them how long I have to pay it back or etc. They tell me however long I want because it's on my terms, because it's cash secured. And I have to say, Mr. Vice President, that the interest rate that they extended to me was much lower than the interest rate on all the other loans that they mentioned.
Senator Seymour has the floor.
So what I do know is that this Goldman Sachs repo deal that we keep talking about, Mr. Vice President, it's no. I'm not the only person who talked about it today. And so that's misleading the public, okay? We've all talked about it. And the reality is that the terms on that loan are different from the terms on the loan they continuously compare it to. And even if we talk about a 2.4% interest rate, we have to take into consideration the 12% up front and calculate what we would call an effective interest rate. But it's fine. If they want to go 2.4, it's 2.4. But we all know that the cost to us is more than 2.4. And we have to be upfront about that. And we have to compare apples to apples, or at least apples to sugar apples, but don't be comparing apples to oranges or no fruit at all, Mr. Vice President, okay? And the reality is that that does not show confidence in any.
Point of order. Mr. Vice President,
Senator Pickstock, what is your point of order?
so the Honorable Senator is indicating that the cost to the Bahamian people is more, right? That's a statement that she is making. And what I'm asking her to do, because I would like for her to further elaborate that or clarify that, right? You see?
Point of order.
You cannot point of order on a point of order.
Yeah, because
No, you can't.
If he's
Senator Pickstock, are you done with your point of order?
If he's directing,
The chair has not recognized Senator Henfield. Senator Pickstock, Senator Pickstock is still on his point of order. Senator Pickstock,
You don't tell her what to do.
Senator Pickstock, are you still on your point of order?
Yeah, you don't tell her what to do.
No,
the chair has that prerogative, not you.
But I'm speaking to the chair.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
You interrupted him in his
That's it,
point of
Mr.
order.
Vice President,
You're interrupting him on his point of order.
all I want is clarification. What I don't want is you can't just throw out statements. I need you to verify that, right? Those statements. And so what I'm asking you to do is to just further elaborate what you were indicating.
Point of order.
Your point of order is on the substantive contribution of Senator Seymour.
No, on the point that this member just
You
made.
cannot have a point of order on a point of
He's
order.
misleading the Senate. He's misleading-
There's no such thing as a point of order on a point of order.
Let me say why. Let me tell you why. Right? It is not his prerogative. If he refutes what the senator is saying, he should say so. And if he never said he refuted or denied what the senator was saying was the truth. He's asking her for a clarification of a point that she made, unrefuted by him.
So
That's
he's
odious to the rules.
so he's putting her to proof, asking for evidence.
How could he do that without denying that what she's saying is truth? Is the member denying what she's saying is truth? And if he's doing that, then he has a point. But if he's not denying what the member is saying is true, he has no point. That's the rule.
Senator Seymour.
Mr. Vice President, Goldman Sachs demanded a 12% discount up front, okay, on the value of the security that we collateralize for the repo, okay? And that's a sunk cost that will not be recovered and thus forms a part of the overall cost of the loan, in addition to the interest rate that we will pay over the time of the loan. And that's all that I was trying to say. And I think that the facts are very clear on that there was a 12% upfront. We know what the interest rate is. We know how much we put down. We know how much we got. This isn't rocket science. You know, I'm not as learned as my good friend Senator Pickstock here. And I don't know all the words he knows. And I don't have the, dictionary he has. But I know that I have good common sense. And if you put down a certain amount of money, you get back a certain, exactly, go Blue Waves. And so you put down a certain amount of money, you get back less money. It don't matter what the interest rate is. At the end of the day, it costs you more than the 2.4%. And that's all I'm saying. And I'm also saying that the unsecured loan that we got in the previous administration at 8.95% is a big difference between that and saying, here, take these U.S. securities. Okay? And these are just facts. So, Mr. Vice President, like I've said, the U.S. is the largest economy and they're bonds trade daily. And those are all facts. Okay? And so it's not like they took, Bahamas registered stock. They took U.S. registered stock. And so it is what it is, but it's not the same to say that this government compared to the other government to compare the two because they're not comparable. They're not apples to apples. Mr. Vice President, get the money to rise. Get the money to the people. That's what we need to focus on. So, Mr. Vice President, this government has constituted a debt management committee and it's led by the private sector. And I want to commend them and I want to say, let's make sure that it's not just lip service, okay? Because our debt is increasing, it's not reducing. And the debt to GDP ratio, while it's decreasing, we're still adding to our debt, okay? And so, we really have to make sure that we get to where we need to be as a country, because this is good for all of us, and we could debate different loan facilities all as much as we want. But this current situation is a liquidity situation. It's not a credit situation because it's a short-term thing. And so we need to get RISE up and running, like I said, so we could get some of the extra breadbasket money that we taxing the rich on now to those who need it most. It's not enough to say it's coming. It needs to be here. We already missed the January 1 opportunity. I'd like to see our country, Mr. Vice President, move toward what the experts, because this budget preparation put me to some work. I had to go back to school. I'm not a financial expert, but like I said, I have good common sense. And so I want to see our country move toward what the accountants described to me as accrual-based accounting, okay? And so we could record all of our liabilities in addition to our assets, and then we'll be able to really know what our true position is financially. And it's almost like the way we have to do as parliamentarians. And so granted, some of our assets, Mr. Vice President, are unalienable, but we still need to know what our government buildings and Crown land and the shares we have in BTC and Alive and Cable and Awak Port Development and BPL and Bahamas, so we kind of need to know what they're valued at. So we'll really know and be able to put, by really defining our assets, we'll be able to put our debt into better perspective and know the true net asset position of our country, because perhaps we do have more assets than liabilities, but we have to get to that. I'd also like to recommend that we look at a program-based type spending, like I said earlier, with key performance indicators, and that's no matter which budget we're presenting. Because then if we're talking about education, it might not be a dollar value we're looking for in return, it might be a social outcome, but at least we know what to expect, and we could better analyze the numbers based on those terms. So, Mr. Vice President, I just want to remind everybody that the repo comparison is not apples to apples, and it's not about, yes, of course, I want to make sure that it's clear, okay? I want to make sure it's clear, okay? It's not apples to apples, and I don't want us to even try to mislead anyone on that, okay? And so it's been a pleasure having an opportunity to do the people's business in this place, to contribute to the midterm budget, because that's why we're focused and that's where we're focused. And I thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, I want to let the member finish before I rise to clarify what seemed to be the vast majority of her speech about this repo transaction.
Absolutely.
So let me be completely clear to the Bahamian people. The repo transaction with Goldman Sachs carries a 2.4% interest rate. We also get the interest on the securities being held as collateral back to the Bahamian people, right? So we get the interest payments that are being held on the collateral by Goldman Sachs payable to the Bahamian government. That's it. That's the second point, right? That's the second point. The third point is they keep saying about a 12% upfront cost. Well, that is not only misleading the Bahamian people, that is dead wrong.
Yes.
So let me just in 2 minutes explain this.
Right.
The 12% upfront is only as to the valuation of the securities, not a cost of the loan, which would mean that the security is actually more than 100% on the loan, right? When we redeem those securities back, when we buy them back from Goldman Sachs in satisfaction of the loan, it's not the 12% discount on the valuation. It is the loan amount.
Right.
So what is happening is the security is 112% of the loan amount. So it's over-securitized. However, when you repay it, you're only paying the loan amount, not the increased security value. Right. So there is no upfront cost to this. Right. So in fact, it's a 2.4% loan, plus we get the interest payments on the securities held by Goldman Sachs, which would bring that loan, that interest rate even down lower. So 3/4 of her contribution was misleading the Bahamian people on this financing transaction. I rest.
You collateralize the loan.
You can't get up on a point of order.
Senator Seymour,
That was your strategy in waiting until I complete it?
you have a response?
I do have a response. Of
Okay.
course, I have a response. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Now, first of all, when this amount becomes due in 24 months, Mr. Vice President, the first thing we have to do is have the actual funds to pay it back, which hopefully we have based on whatever other costs are due at that time. Okay, that's the first thing. We have to have the funds. Okay, and short-term operations like this are risky because when we go to get it back, we're going to be getting it back at whatever the rate is on the day we go to get it back. And that rate could change. And that's just a fact. How could the rate not change? The rate could change based on when we buy it back. The selling rate, it could be different, okay? And furthermore, Mr. Vice President, short-term operations like this, they are expensive and they are risky by nature, and we just have to accept that.
Senators,
okay?
Senator Seymour has the floor.
So short-term operations. I don't know. No. I don't even know the person. Okay, I don't know the person. I talk to the best of the best. Short-term operations like this are preferably only used when we have a short-term mismatch or timing difference between revenue collection versus expenses. Okay, that could be cured within the same budget year. But granted, we did it on a 24-month period. I don't understand why is it that we don't want to accept what the discount fee was. No, I'm answering the discount fee in terms of the percentage, the fee that we paid up from the amount that they demanded. Mr. Vice President, we did not get back whatever our securities are valued at is not the funds that we got back. Now, granted, he explained, hold on a second. Yeah. Granted, he explained that when it comes back, but when you got up and spoke for half an hour during my contribution, I was okay. That was okay. Mr. Vice President, we need to really be clear and be honest. And you know what I want to do? I call on our actual business journalists to do investigative reporting on this and this comparison, because there's a big difference. And the reality is this 2.4.
Okay.
No, this big.
Yeah. Senator Seymour.
The 2.4% interest rate is not the only cost surrounding this loan. And that's just a fact. We're trying to present as if this 2.4% interest rate is the only cost surrounding the loan, and that's not the case. That's not the case. That is not the case.
Okay.
That is not the case.
Senator Seymour, do you have documentation to table what you are asserting in reference to the 12% on the loan?
Mr. Vice President, I have a question. Does he have documentation?
I asked the question, so you can respond to that. Do you have the documentation to table it?
Not, but the facts.
Okay, thank you. The chair, when you do have the documentation, will allow you to table that documentation.
Okay, Okay. We got less than we put down. That's documentation in of itself.
All right.
We did. We got $206 million.
Thank you for your response, Senator Seymour. Thank you for your response, Senator Seymour. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock.
Yep. That's just a fact.
Mr. Vice President, I move that we suspend the session.
I second.
Is there a second?
I second.
For lunch.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be suspended until. Yeah. It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be suspended until 3 p.m. As many are in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, say nay. The motion is agreed. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m.
It does not compare. It was